In the meeting and welcome you to the Coeur d'Alene School District 271 board meeting for July 2nd. Before we get going here, would the gentlemen please remove their hats and everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you for being here on this first Monday of July in the summer. It's a nice crowd for the summer. Before we get going here, I just want to go ahead and introduce who's sitting up here in front of you. And I will start at my far right. And first up is Miss Lynn Town. She's the clerk of the board. Seated to my immediate right is Dr. Steve Cook. He's our new superintendent. This is his first official day on the job as superintendent. So thank you for all coming to welcome him here.
Yeah, I'm just really touched that you're all here to welcome me. And I'm sure that's why there's such a large crowd. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cook. We're all glad you're here. To my immediate left is Mr. Tom Hearn, our vice chair, Miss Lisa May, our board member, Miss Tambra Pickford, board member. And the vacant seat over there is just that. It's a vacant seat. Trustee Dave Eubanks, who's been on the board the last 5 years, recently moved out of the district. And so that seat is vacant, and we'll be getting to that here shortly in the meeting and just give you a little more information on that. My name's Casey Morrisroe, and I am currently the chair of the board. Public comment on district-related items is scheduled near the start of this meeting. Please sign in on the sheet provided at the entrance door. Because of the diversity of issues, members of the board will not respond to public comment made during tonight's meeting. Instead, issues may be recorded and referred to the proper staff person for follow-up. Comments may also be submitted to the board in writing through the clerk. Okay. Is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries, Ms. Town. Okay, for those of you who are regular attenders or watchers, typically at the July meeting, the board does our annual reorganization. So my term as chair, Tom's as vice chair, those are voted. Those are one-year position. They're voted by the board members up here. Recently, I mean yesterday, Senate Bill 1280 went into effect. And what Senate Bill 1280 did is it moved trustee elections from May in odd years to November in odd years. And with that change, new trustees would come on to the board January 1st. So that had a couple ripple effects with it. One of those, all of our terms were extended by 6 months. So will be 4.5-year terms for all of us instead of the usual 4. But also our annual meeting, reorganization meeting, was moved to January. So this came up about a week ago. It was brought to the board's attention that the annual meeting was moved by the law. So we discussed this at last Monday's budget meeting, and what our consensus was at that time was just to maintain the status quo, that we would extend the current terms of chair and vice chair, treasurer, clerk. There's several of them that we're going to run through here in a minute. So board members, if that's still the case, and that's still what we're looking to do, there was a set of motions that were in the board packet just to get that handled. If we can run through those motions, and then we'll move on.
I move to extend the current term for Casey Morrisroe as board chair until the annual meeting scheduled for January 7th, 2019.
Second that.
Okay, been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
I move to extend the current term for Tom Hearn as vice chair until the annual meeting scheduled for January 7th, 2019.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to extend the current term for Catherine Ebner as treasurer until the annual meeting scheduled for January 7th, 2019.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to extend the current term for Lynn Town as clerk of the board until the annual meeting scheduled for January 7th, 2019.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye. I move to designate Lynn Town as custodian of public records.
No second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to extend the appointment of Pamela Westberg as acting clerk in the event of the absence of the board clerk until the annual meeting scheduled for January 7th, 2019.
Second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 I move that the regular meetings of the board for the balance of the calendar year 2018 be the first Monday of the month at 5 p.m. at the Midtown Center Meeting Room, 1505 North 5th Street, Coeur d'Alene, unless otherwise posted for public notice in advance of the meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I
Aye.
move that the third Monday of the month be set aside for special meetings, workshops, and/or forums as needed.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. That's the last.
Last
One
one.
more.
No,
All
one
right.
more. I move to designate the Coeur d'Alene City Hall lobby as a public place for posting of this board's public notices. Additionally, notices will be posted in the main lobby of the District Administration Office, Midtown Center Meeting Room, entrance door, and the District 271 website, including social media sites. The Coeur d'Alene Press and the Spokesman Review newspapers will be provided the meeting agendas at the time of the posting.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, all right.
We are done.
That was a lot, but that's probably the quickest we've ever gone through that. So we'll redo all that fun in January, and it'll take a little more time because we'll kind of work out who's going to be chair and vice chair and those sorts of things. So thank you for your patience there. Next up on the agenda is just the acceptance of Trustee Eubank's resignation and declaration of the vacancy. So a little background on this. Idaho code requires that we declare the vacancy. Ms. Town has prepared a motion on page 7 for tonight's meeting. But before we consider that motion, Ms. Town, can you just explain the process and the timeline that the board agreed to at our June 19th meeting?
Thank you. So once we have declared the vacancy this evening, we're ready to put a press release out, notifying any interested community members that they can submit an application. We'll start accepting those as early as tomorrow up through July 27th at 3 p.m. Those should be delivered to my attention at the district office. Anyone can be considered who is a registered voter and who resides in the zone that is currently vacant, which is Zone 4, and we will have maps available on the website. And you can also call me if you have any questions about your eligibility. If you're interested, an application packet must include a letter of interest, which would include your contact information, main reasons for applying for the position, and top 3 objectives if you're appointed to the position, and also a resume. And again, you can reach out to me if you have any questions or know anyone who might be interested.
Thank you, Ms. Town. I was organizing my notes there. So did you mention August 7th?
I did not.
So I'll go ahead and do it. So those applications are going to be, like she said, collected through the month of July. The board set aside August 7th, the evening of August 7th, to do the interviews. So that will actually be a public meeting here in this room. We'll interview any of the candidates that have applied for the position, and then we'll make a selection after that. So, and we get to do that in public, so you can watch that happen live. Let's decide on that. So, okay, thank you, Ms. Town. Does someone want to?
One question, isn't the boundaries changed a little bit on Zone 4 too? Did you mention that? Are going to change?
Counterpart, Scott. They will change with the boundary change that we are working on between, that was recently approved between Post Falls and Coeur d'Alene. So we'll have a little information in the press release about that, if anyone lives in any of those affected zones, how we'll proceed. There's a map. There are about 2 areas that will be affected. There's my counterpart.
Good evening. The question is the changes in the Zone 4 map going forward with the change in the boundary to the district, if I understand the question correctly. Is that correct? So we are working on that process right now. We just basically began that process this morning, so we don't have a lot of information yet. But my understanding, and Megan might want to jump up and help me here. My understanding is that that will be an automatic change per the statute. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's a process by statute that now that the boundary has been approved, the boundary change has been approved by the State Board of Education, it gets handed over to the Department of Education for issuance of an order. That process is pending, and until that is complete, the trustee zones will remain the same. But when the boundary is official, which hopefully will happen within a month, the statutes provide that any newly annexed area will just be absorbed into whichever contiguous zone it was next to. So that's already provided by statute, and we'll just have to update those maps and make them available to folks.
So can I ask a question on that? So then are we going to ask potential candidates to live in the new zone to avoid having to do this process again? Can we do that or not necessarily?
My recommendation to the board would to be, because we do not know when the annexation order will be completely final, is to advise folks as to the existing zones and then make them aware of what we expect the zones to be as of the date that the board approves this, which we expect it to be done by then.
Right.
And it would be, I mean, the board could not put anyone into office, assuming that the boundary change is finalized prior to the board making its decision. The board could not put anyone into office that was not within the appropriate zone. So it would be a bit silly for folks to be applying, knowing that if someone did do that and the zone had not been finalized, that they could be a candidate. It would be certainly something for the board to consider when making their selection, I would think. And if the person was selected and then the zones were finalized after the fact, they would immediately have to resign at that time. So it invites some chaos.
Because potentially we could have some candidates who are in the post-fall zone who now will be in our zone.
Absolutely.
Right, and
Yeah.
so making sure we advertise so both cities are aware of the vacancy.
Absolutely, and I think that the when we get these maps done, and hopefully they can get done pretty quickly and get posted on everything that the district notifies. So I think that will go. And Scott should probably weigh in on this, but on the website and publish in the paper, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct. We'll provide them to the Coeur d'Alene Press. We'll have them on our website. We'll use social media to amplify that information. As to your question, Trustee May, I looked at the maps this morning, and as it pertains to Zone 4, it may actually only be a couple of residences, farmhouses, that would be coming into Zone 4. There would be more property with more residences that would be shaved or cut out of Zone 4 and going into the Post Falls district. So I think our concern is to make sure the communication there is clear to any potential applicants from that area that this change is in process on a parallel track.
Okay, any other questions on this? Okay,
I move to accept the resignation of trustee Dave Eubanks and declare a vacancy in Zone 4.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you, Ms. Town. Thank you, Mr. Maben. Ms. O'Dowd. Okay, next up is approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes for June 4th, June 18th, and June 25th?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the minutes? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Board comments, we've got no one signed up for that tonight. Are we still good with that? And Mr. Twitchell, I believe, is at the NEA conference, so we do not have a Coeur d'Alene Education Association report tonight. So we're going to breeze along here and get into public comments. Before we do, I want to remind the public that while this is a meeting of the Board of Trustees that takes place in public, it is not a meeting with the public. It is a meeting of the board to conduct district business. The board does allow some limited public comment on district-related items. Those wishing to address the board during the public comment period are limited to one comment not to exceed 3 minutes. If you have additional comments that you would like to present to the board, you may do so in writing through Ms. Town. Please keep in mind that board members will not respond to public comment. If I've determined that an individual's statement is too lengthy, personally directive, abusive, or repetitive, I may terminate the speaker's privilege to address the board. And we've got a handful tonight, so bear with us. First up, Steve Casey. And I'll keep time for you guys, and I'll try to politely let you know when we're getting close to running out of time. You just wasted 5 seconds. He was my principal, so I like to give him a hard time.
There we go. Chair Morso, members of the board, Superintendent Cook, thank you for the opportunity to address the board tonight. Before I begin my comments, I would like to welcome Superintendent Cook to Coeur d'Alene and look forward to his leadership. Had an opportunity to visit with him a couple times, and I think we're in for a treat. So thank you for accepting the job, and thank you for being here. Also, I'd like to thank the board for your hard work. I know how many hours you put in on these topics, or all topics, and very much appreciated. My name is Steve Casey. I have been a patron of Coeur d'Alene School District for 40 years. For the record, the comments I make tonight are entirely my own and should not be affiliated with any committee or foundation of which I am a member. On January 9th, 2017, the Coeur d'Alene School Board gave the green light to run a bond and levy on March 14th, 2017. As co-chair of the YES Committee, a community committee that supported the passage of the levy, I worked side by side with many other community members in that effort to pass the bond. Happily, the bond levy passed with a 77% approval rate. I am passionate about this issue for many reasons, one of which is the fact that my credibility is at stake, just like yours, if we do not build a new elementary school in the northwest section of the school district. On February 12, 2018, the board voted 4-1 to build on the Hayden property. The rationale given was to expedite the construction in order for that the school would open in the fall of 2019. Today, that deadline cannot be met. The MOU with the City of Hayden is still in discussion, and we have purchased property in the northwest section of the district. These events have presented new and pertinent information and warrants a revisit of the vote of the board. So let's look at the sites financially. Building on the Hayden site, there's no land cost. The land is ours. There's 108,000 fee to the City of Hayden for traffic study, appraisal, miscellaneous expenses. There's $11.535 million to build the new school, and the value of the property as it sits right now is $2.179 million. Total investment on that site is $13.8 million. Building on the Prairie site, $1.12 million for purchase of the land. There's about $700,000 in infrastructure, which includes sewer, traffic light, that sort of thing. And again, $11.535 million to build a new school. The total investment at that site is $13.3 million, approximately $400,000 less than the Hayden site. So now let's look at this philosophically. The Hayden site. The school is not in the northwest section of the district as promised to voters in the March 2017 bond levy. It will increase student enrollment by 300 students, most of which must be bused. Having a new school as well as keeping the old school on the same site will significantly diminish the play areas for students, leaving approximately 3.5 to 4.5 acres for children's play. It is already a congested traffic area. Adding 300 more students will only make it worse. $2+ million in land value will be lost and not be available to be sold in the future to buy additional land in the areas of the highest population. The Prairie site. The site is located in the northwest section of the district as promised to the voters in the 2017 bond. It is in the area of the highest growth. It will eliminate the need to use 10 to 14 portables, which arguably are the hardest to protect from intruders. It will allow the district to retain the Nexus site and potentially sell the site at its appraised value of $2.179 million to purchase land in the future.
Mr. Casey, just try to wrap it up, please.
Okay, I'm there. In either scenario, the district will need to seek a new bond in the next 3 to 5 years to accommodate continued future growth in our elementary and middle schools. For me, the future is now, not 3 to 5 years down the road. Our economy is always in a state of flux. Anything can happen in the next several years, and to depend on the successful passage of a future bond when you can address overcrowding and the safety of our students is short-sighted. Please rethink your position and follow the language as presented in the 2017 bond. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Casey. Next up, Jerry Anderson. Good evening, Jerry. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Members of the board and district administration, thank you for the opportunity to have a few minutes of your time this evening. As we all know, the subject of a new elementary school has been a hot potato for at least the last several months. From the beginning of my current term on the Long Range Planning Committee in 2015, we have studied data that was presented by the school district and other sources regarding needs and demographics within the district. A part of that study culminated prior to the 2017 bond election with a recommendation that helped to form the bond proposal that was passed in March of that year. A bond that was not just passed, but overwhelmingly passed by a majority that is quite rare in any election. To me, that type of result is considered a mandate. And it's an important part of the process is to keep the trust of the voters, especially after a mandate. The very first item on the bond campaign list was an item in this document that calls for a new elementary school to include the acquisition of land and construction in the northwest section of the district. The campaign information also outlined each of the construction projects from the previous bond that had been promised, and each one was delivered as promised. Promises to the voters are important. As many of you remember, there was a bond passed in 2002 that had funds for one school diverted to another school project. The result of that was a failed bond election the next time out for the school that had lost its funds to another project. And the school that had funds borrowed from it is still struggling for a complete solution today, 16 years later. Along with the bond recommendation that was ultimately refined and passed in 2017, there was a list of future facility needs compiled by the district, which at that time identified a future renovation of the Hayden Center with a budget of just over $7 million. That project was to be further studied for inclusion in the next bond. When land to satisfy the voters' approval for the new school in the Northwest was seemingly unavailable, the focus turned east to the Hayden Center as a possible site where a new school could be built and ready to open by the fall of 2019 with the $11.5 million in funds that had been approved for the school in the Northwest. The possibilities for the Hayden Center site now seem to have changed with delays that make a fall 2019 opening seem unlikely. At the same time, a recent new property acquisition in the northwest portion of the district makes it possible to keep our promise to the voters. I, like most of you, would like to be able to go through the district and fix all of the shortcomings. But in my mind, we need to start with what has been overwhelmingly approved by the voters and build an elementary school in the northwest portion of the district where the vast majority of the district's portable classrooms will be in use this fall. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Amy Voller.
Good evening, Chair Morrisroe, Honorable Trustees, and Superintendent Cook. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Amy Voller, a community resident and parent with kids in Coeur d'Alene Public Schools. I'd like to emphasize that this statement is entirely my own and should not be affiliated with any group of which I am a member. I stole that from Steve Casey. I am imploring the board not to approve the Hayden MOU this evening. I urge you to give weighty consideration to the fact that the district is in grave danger of jeopardizing voter support for future bonds and levies if the board breaks its past promises and votes to move forward with the Hayden MOU and development on the Hayden site. In recent months, I've referred back to the many documents I was given during my service on the advocacy campaign for the 2017 bond request. Every bit of information I helped disseminate to our community during that campaign promised the purchase of land and the building of a school in the northwest sector of the district to alleviate overcrowding and move students out of outdated and less safe portables. The voters overwhelmingly approved $11.5 million to build a school in the northwest sector of the district west of Highway 95, as outlined by maps in that same literature. Not one voter in our community has had the opportunity to vote and approve any funding for the building of a school on the Hayden site. Not one voter in our community has had the opportunity to vote and approve funding for the building of an elementary school less than a half mile from another elementary school. Not one voter in our community has had the opportunity to vote and approve funding to swap land with the city of Hayden and build a school that will only alleviate half of our student population currently in portables. Not one voter in our community has had the opportunity to vote and approve any funding to build a school that will require additional funds to bus students across town. I applaud the board's efforts to think outside the box and seek ways to expedite the building of a school and alleviate some of the overcrowding in light of scarce land availability and rising construction costs. However, the district now has a better option since it has acquired the Prairie property. Since it is now clear a school on the Hayden site would neither open earlier nor net less financial cost to the district, it is imperative that the board discontinue the pursuit of the Hayden site development at this time. It is not in the best interest of our students, our community, or future bond campaigns. Please do not move forward with the development of the Hayden site on your own accord. Please listen to your constituents and voters. Build on the Prairie site as your voters approved. Use future bond requests to let the voters decide what needs to happen with the Hayden site. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bowler. Next up is Christina Linford. While Christina's walking up there, I'll just mention we've got a lot of people tonight signed up to talk about this, which is great. If you want to get up there and you just want to say, I agree with what so-and-so said, plus this, feel free to do that. Christina, go ahead.
Dr. Cook, Chairman Morrisroe, Honorable Trustees. My name is Christina Linford. I come here today not only as a 2-year member of the Long Range Planning Committee who has studied the issue of the Hayden versus Prairie site, but more importantly, as the mother of 4 children who have endured overcrowding at Skyway Elementary School. Between Ramsey, Skyway, and Atlas, there are over 2,000 elementary students. This area is also being heavily built up with hundreds of homes projected to be built over the next few years. Because of this, multiple portables must be used at these schools. My children have classes in these portables. Being in a portable means enduring the elements multiple times a day to return to the main building, not having running water, suffering from inadequate heating and cooling, and most grievous, these portables are not safe during a lockdown situation, as safe as a brick and mortar building. The overcrowding has also been so severe at times that I had a child who was forced to share a desk during his main day schooling. This was not a small kindergartner, but rather 2 growing 4th grade boys who were forced to try and share a very small area. This is unacceptable. Building at the Hayden site should not be considered until the student safety on the prairie is no longer jeopardized and the portables are gone. In addition to the safety issue, as has been mentioned, the voters overwhelmingly passed a bond supporting a new elementary school in the northwest section of the district. Earlier, it was argued that the district didn't have land in that section. That is no longer the case. Do not betray the voters and build outside where you promised. The success of future bonds depends upon that. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Next up is John Barlow.
Thank you, Chairman, Board, new superintendent. I haven't been in front of the school for a while, but starting in the early 80s, I was here often. And that's why I'm here, because many of the efforts we had to undertake in that time period were very difficult with a struggling economy. And several times we found ourselves in a position of having to make a promise we couldn't keep, and once in a while there was something that occurred that disappointed our voters. And as a group, as a city, as a business leader, chairman of Jobs Plus for 4 years and there for 20 years, the status of our schools is critical. The comments I'm hearing tonight are excellent. Many are redundant with what I have because I think location, cost, speed, and the promise to the voters summarizes it very well. But the one area that I sat and studied with great thought was driving around the community and seeing the housing that's happening is staggering. Prairie Avenue is becoming a difficult road to traverse. And if you go ahead with the Hayden site, it will be at least 2 years to design and build the school. It could be another year or so before you can run a bond. Then you have the same 2 years to design and build. Those kids and these families will be 4 to 6 years from now before they see a school unless something different happens. And in the meantime, they keep building. And it's great because we're selling jet skis and cars and the economy's strong. And it's what we work for. And it's always interesting how growth creates these kind of problems. But these are the kind of problems we can fix. And I guarantee you, if you disappoint the voters, based on the past history, it's going to be an uphill climb. And you have that opportunity by going back to the site that you now acquired. I strongly suggest you do that. If there's any way to move forward with a second school, wherever it's most needed, I'm willing to work hard to help with that so that we can stay ahead of this dilemma that we find ourselves in and have the opportunity with growth and tax dollars to solve these problems. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barlow. Next up is Carrie Frank.
I feel like I need a step stool. So thank you I've never been to one of these. I should have, as my dad was a teacher, but never been to one. So I am just coming to you as a parent. So, sorry. I had 3 kids get transferred from Atlas to Nexa because of the overcrowding, because of the building on Prairie and the building off of west of Atlas. Best decision. I am actually super grateful that my kids got put there. I love it there. So the first speaker, I would love your notes with all of the financials. I am not well versed in all of the details of what's going on, but the last gentleman who spoke too, we need 2 schools if you really look at the numbers, like Miss Linford said. You know, we have so many kids in portables. Like I had kids in portables at Atlas, major overcrowding. You know, it was just a bad situation overall, just with the growth that we're having. So just coming to you as a parent, I love Northwest Expedition Academy because it is such a small town feel. My husband and I both grew up in small towns, and it's so hands-on. I love the just comparing Atlas to Northwest Expedition, because I was at Atlas for 5 years, 6 years before we got rezoned. And I love the hands-on opportunities. I love that they go on expeditions because personally, my high school calculus and my college calculus does nothing for me these days. But the hands-on experience and the fact that they use technology plus teamwork plus go out into the community is amazing. And I think that's what's going to carry the kids far in life, is learning those, because as you read many articles these days, you know, we're moving into a world of like nobody, you know, everyone walks around like this and nobody knows how to communicate and work together anymore. And in my job, I work remotely and I work with people in Jerusalem. I work with people in Arizona, with people in Switzerland, with people in Florida. And if you don't know how to communicate and build that teamwork, you know, I feel like when we were at Atlas, it was all about scores. And while scores are important, you know, we have to really, truly teach our kids. And I loved that Nexa was so small and had that feel. But, and again, I'll state, you know, I don't really know the numbers. Again, I would love your numbers. But just the way this area is growing, I mean, my heavens, driving down 95 just to get here is insane. So I think we're looking at 2 schools, and I don't know exactly where these are located, but I guess I should be saying the Hayden site instead of Northwest Expedition Academy. But we actually live west of 95, and I do not mind at all driving across 95, because we do drive our kids to and from school, and we help other parents carpool that are on the west side of 95. I do not mind at all. But I was reading that article, and I'm sorry if I'm going over time, in the press last night, well, at 1 a.m. this morning, and you know, my kids can't bike. My kids couldn't even bike to Atlas because crossing Ramsey at 8 or 8:30 in the morning with the commuters, you know, one of my kids is probably going to get hit. So to me, that's not a big push. It's, you know, to me, it's what's being taught at the schools and definitely the overcrowding. But that's just, you know, I have another kid coming in. I have 5 kids. I mean, I have 1 and 2. Well, my oldest was just in 5th grade there at Nexa, and hands down best experience. And, you know, all 2 in middle school, and I still have another one coming up, and I would love for her to be in there at that school. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up is John McTier.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the board and the staff. I did submit some comments in writing for the board's consideration. I hope they've been read and will be considered. There have been lots of facts and figures tonight, but I think what the board has to consider is the breach of trust, the breach of faith, if you don't proceed with what's been promised to the bond voters very recently. I find it disturbing that so soon after the bond was approved, the focus turned from serving the immediate and near-term needs in the northwest part of the district to addressing an MOU with the city of Hayden and rehabilitation of the Hayden School site. So again, I would just suggest to you that for future support by the community for bond issues that are sure to come up, that you pay attention to what the voters have said to this board and to the community in the most recent bond issue. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Betsy McTier. Okay. Thank you for being here. All right, next up then is Russ McLean.
Hi, you guys. I'm not really up on which school and where and all that stuff. I put my faith. You guys are a good bunch, so you'll make the right decision. I got faith. But, you know, Hayden's in a bad spot with the lawsuit and the sewage treatment plant and all that. I would really like to see that be a Boys and Girls Club or senior center, or combination of the both, community center, and built out there on the prairie. I think that would, this kind of seems to be going that way, and Hayden needs something to perk it up a little bit. They're in a bad spot. If we could throw them a bone, let's do it, okay? But anyway, it's your decision.
Okay, thank you, Russ. This next one, I'm going to take a stab at this. I think it's Vic Peterson. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Sorry, my writing was so poor.
No, it's a great signature. I wish I had it.
Greetings to Superintendent Cook and the board. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you. I've lived in the Coeur d'Alene School District all my life, most of that in the Hayden area. I worked for the school district for over 40 years, and since my retirement, I've evaluated probably 300 or 400 school sites. And so it kind of gives me an interesting perspective, I think. I'm concerned about your decision to build on the Hayden site and would like you to reconsider that. Two things primarily that I think of is being east of Highway 95. The traffic on that road is going to grow over the years, and I just think you're going to have a serious problem with traffic over time. And then the size of the site concerns me quite a bit. In my evaluations of facilities, every time I see a small site, they have difficulties, and you can't provide for all the things that you would normally like to have. For example, adequate parking, separate traffic lanes for buses, separate traffic lanes for parents, getting the traffic off of the street. You already have that problem at Hayden Meadows, and then you turn around and you put that traffic problem at Hayden Center. I think you've got a serious problem. So, and then if you'll provide for all of those things, then you infringe on space for kindergarten, a separate kindergarten play area, separate primary and intermediate play area, and then green space or blacktop space. So those are the things that really concern me. It seems to me you've made a decision on short-term concerns, and ultimately, when I think back about the school sites that I've looked at, you're making a decision that's going to last 75 to 100 years. And to make that decision to be at Hayden at this time, in my mind, is a wrong decision. I'd like you to reconsider. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. We've got about 9 more to go here. Rick Jones, you're up next. He's going to change the topic here for us for a second, then we'll get back to Hayden MOU.
And now for
Good evening,
something
Rick.
completely different. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Superintendent Cook, thank you for this opportunity. A few weeks ago, I sent the members of the board an email outlining my concerns about several policies and lack of guidance that I think needs to be implemented. We've got several policies related to students enrolled in other public school districts attending classes in our district, but we don't have anything that addresses our students attending classes in another public school. As a result, we have students who receive credits from another public charter school in the area that without any conversation with our staff, without any conversation at the district office, and they maintain their enrollment at our school, and they receive a diploma from our school. This means one of two things. Either the student was enrolled in 2 public schools at the same time, without any communication between the schools, which if I understand correctly is a violation of state policy, or they're receiving credit from a school, class credits from a school in which they were never enrolled. This year, a student told me he was going to stop working on a couple of his classes at our school and take them at another school and receive his credits that way. Without any guidance in terms of policy, procedure, or practice, there was nothing I could do but say, well, hope it works out for you. In an extreme case, one student earned 17 credits from that other school and wasn't even enrolled in any classes on our campus the second semester of her senior year, and she walked across our stage and received our diploma. At some point, there needs to be a decision that this student is now enrolled in another school. I'm asking the board to develop or adapt policy which outlines what students can or cannot do with regard to classes taken at other public schools and still receive a diploma from one of our schools. If it's determined that there's nothing we can do to prevent students from continuing this practice, due to state policy perhaps, then policy 2720, which relates to the high school graduation ceremonies, should be modified to prohibit a student who earns credit without prior authorization from the administration for participating in our graduation ceremonies. We have express permission required for a student to take an online course. We have staff involvement if they take a course through IDLA, but there's nothing that dictates what a student can or can't do with regard to other public schools allowing them to take classes at their school. So I hope that you'll take a look at what I sent you, and if you have any questions, certainly contact me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Jen Brumley.
Apparently, I wasn't aware of where I was at in the line. I wasn't expecting that.
You're on page 2.
Yes,
You thought you were
are.
second. You were
Yes,
second
you
on page
are.
2.
Good evening, Board, Superintendent Cook. My name is Jen Brumley. I have an 8-year-old at Ramsey Elementary. I have a 15-year-old at Lake City High School. I am a longtime resident of Coeur d'Alene, and I'm also a 1-year, now have just completed 1 year on the long-term or long-range planning committee. So I'm here just to state my opposition to building on the Hayden site. I wrote a letter to the board, an email, letter to the board before your vote in February, asking you to honor your commitment to the voters at that time and do what you needed to make sure that we were building in the northwest section, and I still advocate for that. I respect the fact that circumstances were a little different at that time, and I think you are at a point that you can reconsider the vote that occurred back in February because our circumstances are different. We have property in the northwest section, we have funds to build there, and I think it is imperative to keep the trust of our voters. I grew up here. I went to kindergarten through 12. My parents were both involved in the education system here. My dad is an administrator. My mom is a teacher. So as a kid, I was far more in tune with the issues of School District 271 than probably many were. And it struck me as so odd growing up to have a particular individual in that day advocated all the time against bonds. He would have a float in the parade. He would have flyers that went out. He would do newspaper clippings opposing every bond and every levy opportunity that came around. And I can remember asking my parents, why would somebody be opposed to kids? I looked at it that way. Why would somebody be opposed to kids? And I guess as an adult, I don't know. I didn't know all the politics. I don't know all the reasons why this certain individual was so opposed to School District 271, but I can understand a breach of the fiduciary trust and that responsibility that comes between voters and the constituents that can create a situation where maybe we do have advocacy in a fashion that we've never seen in recent times for Coeur d'Alene. To pass a bond by 77% from my perspective is fairly unprecedented, and as Mr. Anderson said, almost a mandate. I appreciated his terminology and what he said today, and for the record, I agree with Amy and Christina and Steve and Vic and all their perspective here. And then the last comments I just wanted to make is having a child at Ramsey in portables, I know the overcrowding. I appreciate it. I also know that to have my child bused away from where I own the home I lived in. I grew up with my parents. I bought it from them. I'm in that zone 4, ironically. I live right there and went to Ramsey, and to have her bust away from me would be heartbreaking. I can't imagine the parents that are having to go through that. And so if there's anything I can do to advocate that kids stay closer to home, that's what I'm going to do. And that's part of what my email said, is that not only do we need to not breach the trust of our voters, but we need to be thinking about kids. And I know you guys are looking at this Hayden site for the overcrowding piece, but you got to look at the busing piece. Not only you're going to be busing kids away from their homes, away from their neighborhoods, but the cost associated with that needs to be the part of the calculation, as opposed to kids being able to walk to their school and be with their friends in their neighborhood and not removed from that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Next up is Laura Helsum. Did I say that right? Nelson. Oh, Nelson. I wasn't even close.
Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for letting me speak today. My name is Laura Nelson, and I'm currently the NEXA PTA treasurer. And this morning I got a text message that this meeting was happening, and I'm emotional because I thought that this was already addressed. I thought that this is something we'd already concluded on, so pardon my emotion. The biggest question that comes to my mind is, what about the 270 plus kids that are already at NEXA, that have already been pulled from their schools, that have already had to trust that they are going to be taken care of by us and our board? And when I was told, in the realization in 2017, that my child was going to be pulled from Atlas, which is one of the prestigious schools in our district, I was angry and upset. My neighbor still attends Atlas. They were approved to stay. The bus route still goes down my street. My child is bused to NEXA across 95. This concerned me, obviously, so I needed to get involved. I didn't like the school. I didn't like the site. I didn't like the fact that I'd heard rumors that the school had had problems in the past. But I trusted and believed in the path that we were taking. And got involved right away. The school didn't have any funding. There was nothing in the PTA budget. There was books that were donated that I had to clean with Lysol. There was, the children had, they had buckets and drums made of garbage pails and shakers made of plastic bottles. And we had the best year of our entire experience in the Coeur d'Alene School District. Not just because of the site, but because of the staff and the belief that we have that these children are going to come into the world and come up in our community benefited. So to keep a smaller school there, keep us from moving our children again for the third time. My child would attend the third elementary school move. I stayed within my elementary school all the way through, and I'm friends with my friends from kindergarten. I still know them. I think it's unfair to yank these children out again and put them in another location again. And I feel like I need to speak on behalf of them. I have a kindergartner entering in this year, and to have her moved as well is going to be another emotional experience for me and my family. We raised over $7,000 this year for the PTA, hands-on, attending every single fundraiser, putting on the exhibition night, getting the community involved. We had local businesses participate. We had a local bank participate. We made enough money to fund the entire yearbook and get one to every single child. And all of that was done by passion and love, because we were pulled out from where we were, may not have gotten involved. So please consider keeping us where we are, letting the school continue to thrive. And Hayden, I believe, and I've heard a lot from the community here, I believe Hayden needs this elementary school. I believe that it will provide more community to our environment that we have right downtown, and it would be beautiful. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Next up, Cindy Inge, thank you.
So I would like to thank you guys as well for the opportunity to speak tonight. I am the NEXA PTA secretary. I have a student going into second grade there. I totally understand the need for following through with the vote from your levy back in 2017. If I remember specifically, it's stating that there needs to be a school at the northwest site. However, you know, with the rezone and our kids being pulled from Atlas and other schools, I guess I'm getting emotional too. They've really built something neat there at that site. Again, I know that you have to build somewhere else, but I ask that you still keep us in our little school. You know, it's been an amazing year, and I'd hate to see those kids be moved again. We talk about busing clear across town. You know, I am on the corner of 95 and Miles, basically, and my kids would be bused clear across the way. So I appreciate them staying in their little zone there. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Next up, Michael Thayer.
Thank you to the board. I'll make this brief. I agree with most of what everyone had to say. You know, Mr. Casey made a pretty compelling argument from a numbers perspective. And I would say that, yeah, the voters approved something for the northwest part of the school district, not for something in downtown Hayden where, you know, despite the fact that we had $100,000 in traffic study costs, we still haven't considered the real traffic mitigation impact that we might have going up and down with buses and cars on Government and on Hayden Avenue. So, you know, I agree with everyone, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Thayer. And I know I said we're not going to address comments, but I thought I just misheard Mr. Casey, but we did not have $100,000 in traffic study costs. So I just want to put that out there so no one thinks we spent $100,000 on a traffic study, or just clarify that. But thank you for your comments. Next up, Bill Rutherford.
Good evening, Board Chair Morrisroe, members of the board, and Superintendent Cook. Welcome. Happy to have you here. This is exciting for you, I'm sure. Welcome to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. My name is Bill Rutherford. I'm the principal at NEXA. I'm excited to see all the interest in us. People are interested in what's going to happen to our kids, and these are kids that we see every single day, and I think that's awesome. I think I love the passion and the emotion, and I think educating kids should be passionate and emotional. And I also believe that we've done a lot of work to make, well, I was asked a year and 4 months ago to create a school in 5 months from nothing. And I know that I also talked to 80 different families, many of you out here, separately with your kids. And I made a promise that we would have, well, you know what I made a promise to you for, that we'd have an awesome school and that our kids, your kids would be learning in their community and your kids would be passionate. And they wouldn't just learn from books, they'd learn from being involved in their community, and they'd learn from walking down to City Hall and sitting with the city planner and finding out why people want to build in Hayden. And they learn by going to the library and by planting plants in the city park. And our kids at NEXA have gone on 52 expeditions this year, exclusively funded by grants that we raised. And 25 of those expeditions were on foot. And our Prairie site doesn't offer us that. Where do we go? Can't walk down Prairie Avenue very well. Our site I won't even call it the Hayden site, it's the NEXA site. Our NEXA site is an awesome place to educate children. We have imagine if you were a kid, if you were like 8 years old, and you're watching this building being built, and you were part of the person who met with the architects, which we did, helped design the school, which those little kids did, decide how the school will look, what the classrooms will be like, why the halls need to be a lot larger than they are in a traditional classroom, why we have to have access to the outside. Ask the kids who did the traffic study on buses in our school. Remember, we still have kids in our school. There's 270 kids who attend every single day. We have the best traffic system in the district. I've worked at 4 different schools, and never have we had a traffic issue like we have at Nexa. It takes us 7 minutes to get kids from the Bell off of our campus on their way home. No other school does that. I get it that we'll also have another 200 kids there, but those 200 kids they'll come from other schools. They'll come from hopefully portables in other schools, but that only eliminates 10 portables. We'll need another site. The minute our kids leave Nexa, if they move to the Prairie, we'll need another elementary school that very day. So what I believe is that I believe 2 things. I believe that there are no villains there. Everybody is passionate about what they believe, and everybody loves our community, and that's awesome. I believe you have a difficult decision. And so those are 2 things that I believe. So what I know that it's not a yes or no, it's not a here or there kind of thing. It's a how can we make this work, where we can open up 2 schools, and we could put all of our children that need to be outside those portables in 2 classrooms, or 2 schools, 2 individual schools with walls and with doors and without wheels. So that's what I know. So thank you for making your decision. I know that you received passionate letters from our parents, and they love where they are, and they love what they do, and their kids are beautiful. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rutherford. Brianna Weinberger.
Thank you, board members, and welcome, Dr. Stephen Cook, and thank you for joining us on this very special day. Just as Mr. Rutherford said, I am the reading specialist at Northwest Expedition Academy, and before then I was a teacher at Skyway Elementary. And I moved to a place where I had to cross 95 because I had to walk across school, and it took me like 2 minutes of walk, and I loved it. But then I was promised this school where kids would go and explore, and they would want to come, and you would want to go to work, and I went there, and it happened, and it existed. And then I met these other people who worked there, and they had it happen, and it existed. And when Steve Casey said that he was talking about, for me, the future's now. No, it happened. It happened this last year. And when we opened Northwest Expedition Academy, we alleviated some of that. And I can see that growing and happening again. And I completely agree with Mr. Rutherford that if we can make it possible to open up that second school or do something, I know we can. And when we passionately wrote those letters at the beginning of the year saying, yes, build here, there wasn't that other option. And now there is. So it makes more opportunities for students, and that's what I think we all believe in. Some of the things, again, they have these numbers that come from the outside, and I got this whole year of 180 days of numbers that I got to see. We timed the time. It was 5 minutes to 7 minutes of getting those kids out on the buses, and we're like, yeah! And I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember used to like freezing my butt off at Skyway. It was like 15, 20 minutes, and then you're like, oh, the bus is not coming yet. When you talk about parents driving, I was in that driving line with those parents honking on the street of Skyway, so I understand that. I didn't get to see that at Nexa. There's like this big long loop, and it was lovely, and it's been great. So these things as a small school, these potential hypothetical things, because you have hardworking people thinking outside the box, it hasn't happened. And so when we get all these facts and then we see the reality that we're servicing these 320 students and that potentially we could double it or potentially a whole other school site could exist, I mean, you are saying yes when the voters said yes to giving those kids outside of the portables. And any way you do it is the right way. But I ask you to think about the good year that happened. All of the things where the students were walking. And we ask community members what kind of community you want. You want kids who are involved. Well, we have these kindergartners who are involved in their community doing these walking expeditions and this wonderful work. And And I know it's going to happen in other schools. I don't know if this philosophy, if you go on our website and read it, can exist in Prairie, but you know what? It will probably, because we have these amazing staff that will make it happen. But instead of teachers getting to work that 30 minutes to an hour on filling in the lesson, we're going to probably spend that 30 minutes to an hour writing another grant so we can bus somewhere else. So it's not going to change, but it's going to be how we use our time that changes. And so I just have to say that moving to Nexa and being part of creating this wonderful environment has been the best thing ever. And I feel like every day I did it, I, in my small little crummy office, said yes to like getting those kids out of those portables. I'm glad we have another site option, but I hope whatever result comes in, that we don't lose that passion and integrity, because when people voted yes to get them out of portables, it's saying yes to a good education, and that's the base of it all. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, 2 more to go. So next up is Wanda Quinn. Our last 2, I think, are experienced board members who waited at the back of the room to sign up at the end.
We didn't know to sign up because we're used to being up there. Thank you, Chairman Morrisseau, board members, and welcome Superintendent Cook. And we welcome you to the community. I'm sort of going to give a historical perspective, and sort of a history repeats itself. When my eldest child, for the record, I am sort of Switzerland. I have 3 children that will be grandchildren that will be going to Hayden Meadows, and 3 children that will eventually be going to Skyway. So I feel like I'm right in the middle here. And what I'm reminded of is when our eldest, Connor, went to 1st grade at Harding, and both Harding and Hayden Lake were deemed unsafe as schools. And so the Harding PTA and the Hayden Lake PTA got together, and we thought, we've got to do something about this, and realized, well, we probably as 2 schools couldn't accomplish much, so we brought all the schools together and effectively started what is now the PTO Alliance. And together we were able to pass an SPFL for 55%, which was phenomenal at that time, and with the intention that we would sell both Harding and Hayden Lake. And of course we passed it, and then with the SPFL, the money comes in, the issue became who went first. And so, again, determined to win, I filled my living room with our Harding parents and brought the superintendent, Merlin Ludwig, who I believe was new then too, and we were there to make our case. That it was Harding that deserved it because we'd been waiting the longest. They had had a remodel. And Superintendent Ludwig presented the numbers. And as Harding parents, we had to look at those numbers and say, you know what, it doesn't compare. And as parents, we said, you know what, Hayden Meadows goes first, because the numbers are there and they justify it. So the first message, Superintendent Cook, is if you have another controversial issue like this, you're welcome to use my living room. And it's even bigger now. But secondly, I understand where the Nexa parents are coming from. And I do hope you can continue as we did in Harding in our little facility. I know what you're in because we were in it at Harding. And it is not, and we moved to Fernan, and it, as you know, Bill, it is not the brick and mortar. It is the culture, the teacher, the principal that makes the school. And you've done it where you are, and I just hope we can come to an agreement as to where we are with numbers. No one is trying to undo what has been done well in all of our schools. But the issue of numbers, and I'm hoping we can sort of take this as the Harding way, as just a suggestion as how to move forward. The numbers certainly speak to the Northwest quadrant. And again, the 77% passage rate was unheard of when John and I, years ago, were in this work. And I was also part of the board that diverted the funds. And that was not our finest hour. And so I hope that this board doesn't have to go down that same route to then have to rebuild the trust. And from 94 to 2006, while I was on the board, our philosophy was we needed Hayden Lake to absorb the growth that was coming. And the philosophy at that time was that this community would not support building anticipating growth. So what we had to do was fill the portables to justify the building of the building. And unfortunately, because of our history, you as a board member are having to deal with that. And I do believe that it probably warrants some reconsideration on what we have historically done. That the times have changed, there are new issues, and maybe that philosophy of having to fill portables to justify a school is maybe not our best method forward. And I'm sorry we have put you in this position, but I give you just a little history to help you in making that decision, and I don't envy you that decision. I will just say this is a lot smaller and a lot calmer than changing boundaries around schools. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn. And last up, Christy Wood.
Good evening, board. Thank you very much. Welcome, Superintendent. Well, I really want to express to you that you have retired educators, former board members, and we're here as friends, not foes. Most certainly we understand the situation you're in and the decisions that you need to make. And I agree with Wanda, everything she said about our past mistakes. We have to learn from those. And I've certainly with everything that everyone said. I would like to focus my time on school safety. I retired from the Coeur d'Alene Police Department after 26 years as a police officer. I spent 4 years as a school resource officer in the buildings personally. I know every nook and cranny of the buildings. And from there, I became, for the next 15 years, I supervised the school resource officer unit. And we had an incredible relationship with this district. I know the police department still does. You talk about a great partnership that was developed, and you still have it. And the commitment from all of you and the commitment from the police department to keep our students safe is very solid. I've participated in numerous planning exercises, safety assessments of buildings during construction sites, remodels, the camera systems, the card lock systems, you name it, we were in the middle of it. And, you know, those SROs, they will do anything in their power to keep the students, the staff, and your educators safe. We have to continue to give them the tools. And I guess what I want to focus on is the portable situation is not good. Wanda's right. That probably got set up through many years from school boards. It's just all that we knew. We have to push kids into portables. We're out of space. But really, when you're dealing with active shooter situations, which we train for all the time, we can't keep them safe. The law enforcement cannot keep them safe in the portables. And if you go with the Prairie site, like was originally voted in, you know, you can eliminate 18 of those portables. Not all of them, but it's a really great step forward. And so I want to tell you that there's a number of people in this room and in the community that will help you. We will help you with a campaign. We will focus on school safety. We'll do everything we can to get another elementary, because I know you need it. And I think together we can do it. I was in the building at Lake City High during Columbine. And I remember all of us watching it on the television and just being horrified. That was so long ago, and so much worse has happened. And you can't even imagine what's almost happened in your own district, but because of your school resource officers and your administrators who work so hard every day, we've managed to keep the kids safe. We have to keep that in the focus, and if you can do anything to eliminate those portables and focus on school safety, I'll be here to help too, and I think all of these people will. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that was everyone on the list, so thank you all for being here and commenting tonight and sharing your thoughts with us. We appreciate that. Board members, next up here is the consent agenda item. So is there a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda, items A through L?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on that? All right, seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries, Ms. Town. For those of you who are regular attendees, we've switched up the agendas a little bit. We're going to try something new here. So we used to do information items first and then action items. And as we were talking about it last week, we thought, most people who come and speak, particularly tonight, come for the action items. So we're going to try and handle our action items first now. So if you've been here before, that's a little different. So first action item up is the MOU with the City of Hayden. And Dr. Cook, I might turn that over to you or Megan, or how do you want to start that?
Thank you, Chair Morse-Rowe. I just want to mention that you guys talked about this last month and consideration of what those agreements might be with the City of Hayden. And so tonight I asked Megan O'Dowd if she would mind sitting in case there were any questions you'd like to ask her about the implications of an MOU and what that agreement might look like, rather than try to write a memo and anticipate questions. I felt like it would just make a lot more sense to have that dialogue here, and she's here to answer any questions we might have tonight.
I guess my only question is, do we need to do this and how soon, if we do an MOU?
Good question. Thank you, Trustee Hearn. So the background on the memorandum is there had been discussions going on for some time about if the city and the district were to engage in this land swap, what steps are involved, what does that look like, that kind of thing. It is a somewhat complicated process to do it, because there are some steps, which I'll go through in a minute, of what we're trying to outline in terms of what's in the MOU. But your first question is it legally necessary? No, it's not. The Idaho Code does give the district the ability to engage in land exchanges. There are some legal steps that have to occur. One is the appraisals, and those have been done. So no, it's not legally necessary. I think the intent with the MOU was to give a big picture conceptual basis of what all of these steps might look like to get us there. And so we can go into that if you have questions about what those steps might look like. But I think to answer your question, legally required, no. The board could table this or move forward and work through some of the additional things that need to be done if the board did decide to do the land swap, and just essentially move to the land exchange agreement directly.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Megan on the MOU?
Megan, I have some questions, but if we're gonna, it kind of depends if we're gonna move forward. I have some really specific questions on the MOU itself, but it might be better for the next meeting potentially when we discuss this, because this is just kind of the initial dance, and then we're gonna really drill down on the specifics. Is that correct?
I think that's up to the board. I think it is on for a potential action item, so certainly the board could vote to approve it as written. I think the board could table the discussion, certainly, or they could vote otherwise as well. But
Well, I'll go ahead and ask you then. Mine was on the sewer upgrade. There's no time frame. We're not mandating. It says that Hayden will do that, but we're not actually mandating if they change their mind that they have to do that. So I didn't know if you felt it necessary to put some language in there that would say we would, they've discussed it with us, they've mentioned it, but if we would like it to be done. It's in section E, number 2, section E.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think in some of the discussions, and I think, again, some of the big concept goals with this was that it would be a land exchange, $0 being traded by either the city or the district directly at the time that the transfer happened. So to do that, again, our steps would be a couple. We would have to subdivide our Hayden parcel. And we've all seen the maps, but the idea would be to create a new parcel around what is the existing Nexa school. The city owns the property to the north. At the end of that subdivision process, they would be relatively the same size. And then to engage in the swap, there would have to be a lease back from the city to the district so that we could actually stay on that existing school district site during the construction. So that document would have to be drafted, and then the actual infrastructure work would have to take place. And one of the items is we have, and the city has an easement against the Hayden Lake property already for, I think it's 20 feet in width. And it essentially runs through the parcel in such a way that the school couldn't be built over on top of that. So there were discussions to realign that, and the city is open to that. That's one of the items that the MOU discusses, is that's something that would have to be redrawn and redone. What has been discussed so far is that the district would actually assume those realignment costs, and part of the exchange, if you will, was to have the infrastructure for the sewer in the city road there to the south, which is Hayden Avenue, would be upgraded by the city. My understanding, and I don't know if anyone is here from the city, there was discussion and language proposed to try to put in a drop-dead date to have that upgrade work done. And frankly, I don't think the city was able or willing, if you will, to agree to those types of things. So it is a bit open-ended.
Yeah, and I guess my concern for that was because this was a costly item to be done, and it kind of was part of the exchange and value and the assessment, I would feel more comfortable if there was a drop-dead date included in that.
Okay. And again, I don't know exactly, and I wish someone from the city was here to speak to this, but my sense is that the funds from the city end are quite limited as well. For them to do that may require a separate bond or something like that. So I think we had originally proposed that those upgrades be made within a year or so. My understanding is that the upgrades are not necessary in order for the new school to be on that location, but would help future growth, if you will.
Go ahead.
Megan, on the MOU, I guess this is kind of my understanding of how we got the MOU. And if you could just tell me if that's correct, and that's kind of the path we were going. But, several months ago when we didn't have another property option, and the board decided, okay, this is our best option. It was our only option at the time to open the school quickly. We started engaging in conversations with the city of Hayden of how we can make that work. And part of that, we did the traffic study, and we've done a number of different things, but I guess at some point thought, let's agree on the big picture items before we try to agree on the finite details. So that was kind of my understanding, I guess, of the MOU, is let's make sure we're on the same page conceptually before we try to work out the fine details. Because if we wait, another 2 or 3 months and work out the fine details and figure out we're not together, we've wasted we've just wasted that much more time. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah, I think that is an accurate representation. Definitely one, to make sure that conceptually we're all on the same page. These are the steps that we all see needing to happen. And although there are a lot of details that would go with each step, we could at least identify the big picture items that we think exist. And additionally, I think that the city was interested in seeing something more definitive from the board in terms of what is it that the board is interested in doing and what's their expectation. So yes, some sort of document that demonstrates the shared understanding of where we're trying to go. But that said, yes, there's a lot of details that still would need to be worked out. Subdivision being one that would need to happen in the very near future.
Okay, so if the board chooses to take no action on this tonight or to table this, could we continue in those discussions just on a land exchange agreement, just to see what that might look like, and do that without an MOU?
Absolutely. Legally, from our perspective, it's certainly not required. The city has executed this already. I believe they did it about a month ago or a few weeks ago. They approved it. So they are certainly on board with this concept. I think that it might give them a misunderstanding of, well, are we still in agreement on what conceptually we're all working towards? But yeah, absolutely. Legally, we could start working out some of those finer tuned details. And as I mentioned, one of the very first things that we would want to do is apply for the minor plat subdivision, where we could actually create the 2 parcels. That's a somewhat lengthy process, and even though as a public agency we get expedited to the front of the line, and they have to help us kind of shepherdize that through. At the quickest, I think that's a 4 to 6 week process. At the end of that, we would actually have 2 legally created parcels with their own legal descriptions, and that would be the absolute earliest that we could even exchange in the swap. But certainly from our perspective, we would want what would normally be a purchase and sale agreement in a typical transaction, and we're just calling it the land exchange agreement because there are so many other pieces. So because those parcels have already been appraised, that would be something that we would have to look at, and then the board would, at the very end of this, identify, what by resolution review, what the appraisals are, what the values are, and that they're okay with that you're all okay with the long-term swap here. Some of the other details that would be involved would be the city is actually going to be acquiring, what would be the existing school site parcel. They have to do a review of that site to see if it meets their city code requirements. Because we do not have a legal parcel yet, it's difficult for them to start doing that process, but the exhibits that we've created, I think, at least from our perspective, are very close, and so we've encouraged the city to start doing that evaluation review process so they can tell us, yes, indeed, this layout works for us and is what we need. But until they are done with that detailed review, we are not 100% sure on what that layout would look like. The lease would need to be agreed upon. The parking agreement, there would probably need to be some sort of long-term parking agreement reached. There would need to be an amendment to the existing sewer easement. These are the big picture items that we'd have to work through.
I don't have any questions of you, but I do have a few comments, and then I'm also going to have a motion to make.
Steve's got a couple.
Or Steve, go ahead. I'll save my comments for a few minutes.
So, Ms. O'Dowd, you and I've talked about this a little bit, but just remind me, what if the board were to pass the MOU tonight, what does that obligate us to?
What?
And if they were to deny the MOU tonight, what does that obligate us to? And in the long run, does that have any impact on whether or not a school is built on Prairie or at the Nexus site or anywhere else for that matter? Can you kind of give us all a little bit of edification on how these things all fit together?
Yeah, absolutely. So if the MOU is not approved tonight, well, let's start with, if it is approved, what does that mean? Is it a legally binding agreement? The caveats in the MOU say that we have to work in good faith to see if these conceptual ideas can be reached to fruition. So that is what we are agreeing to do, work in good faith. So if the exhibits that we had created and the conceptual sites plans that we have laid out, if the city did their review and decided, oh, this layout's not going to work for us at all, we need 30 more feet or 20 more feet or something like that, well, that would change the terms. We had worked in good faith. If that no longer works for the district, we would have satisfied our obligations. So it does obligate the district to continue to explore these conceptual ideas and see if we, working together, can reach an agreement. That's the binding effect of the MOU. If the district decides to not approve the MOU tonight, certainly we can still move forward with the land exchange process. I think that would be some direction that would need to be given to make sure that that's still where the board would want to go, because we would want to, as we discussed, we would need to want to keep moving that process forward and at least lay the groundwork, such as getting the plat approved so we have the parcels in place, allow the city their time to review and evaluate the site, and start working through those things. And And frankly, the time frames that we had been working under before, because the district was trying really hard to get something done and, you know, going out to bids with architects this fall, having a school built by next fall, was really the driving force. The city wasn't in this huge rush. I mean, I really think it was the district that was pushing those timetables, but I mean, I think folks have already identified it. We could not, the land exchange process will take several months, and that would be, you know, this, like I said, the plat itself will take 4 to 6 weeks. Once that plat is done and we have our parcels, we had discussed with council for the city to have all of these agreements already drafted and reviewed, hopefully, by everybody. And so that if it does look like it's a green light, we could sign these agreements and have it ready to go, frankly. But there are a lot of drafting and detail work that would need to be done. So to get back to your two questions, if the board signs this and approves it, it means we have to work in good faith to see if we can make these conceptual concepts fit for our district and for the city. If the district tabled it, then we can just decide to continue to talk about this at another date. If the city or if the district voted it down, that doesn't, from my perspective, mean that it cannot happen. It just means that this MOU isn't the structure that the board wants to use, and we could continue to look at the land exchange and potentially bypass this MOU altogether, do a different MOU. I mean, that's totally up to the discretion of the board.
Dr. Cook, I had a clarifying question. So on that same lines, when would you say legally we could start to develop this land? What would be your best time frame or timeline?
When you say develop, meaning like
Start building, break ground.
Okay, so assuming that it's through the land exchange process, the plat would take 4 to 6 weeks. So the district has hired Architects West to do some of this conceptual planning, and they have an engineer or a surveyor that has already put together the plat. So they are ready to apply for the minor plat subdivision application. If that happens, like I said, we add 4 to 6 weeks. A lot of this other background work could be done in that time frame. But I would say, I mean, when we were originally looking at this, we were thinking that the swap could be completed by potentially September. If that were to happen, then we hand it over to the architect and say, okay, this is actually your piece. Now draw actual plans that we could go out to bid for. And others may have a better sense of that than me, but what I've been hearing is that maybe that would be, you know, spring or winter when we could actually go out to bid for construction. But don't hold me to that, because we'd really need John Mueller here to give us a better sense of what his timing would be.
Are your questions answered there? Okay. Let's just kind of go over what's in front. Turn my mic on here. So let's go over what's in front of us. So it's the MOU that's in front of us today. So that's the only item we could take action on. Certainly, we've heard a lot of great testimony and information tonight, and received a lot of input over the weekend from various stakeholders in regards to their thought and building at Prairie or building here. We're not noticed for that decision, so we can't make that decision. But I think what we need to do is first kind of decide where we're at on this MOU, and I think we should kind of go through all of us. That'll give me some direction of just where we're going with the vote on this. And then depending where we go there, I think we need to just give direction to Dr. Cook and staff of next steps and what our expectations are and what else we need to continue moving forward. So does someone want to start with their thoughts on kind of the MOU that's in front of us today, and whether we table that, approve it, or not?
I do have a comment to make, and it is related to the MOU, and it's related to some of the comments that were made out here in the community and that I have been listening to in the emails we received. You know, the decision on where to build our new school has been very difficult for the school board and administration, because there are many good arguments for building a school at the Prairie Avenue and the Hayden Elementary School sites. We've had many letters and comments supporting both options. Perhaps we can come up with a third option. I've been reading a book lately on Abraham Lincoln, and I think some of his quotes are relevant. He said, "I do not think much of a man who is not wiser today than he was yesterday." And he has a right to criticize who has a heart to help. Also, another humorous quote relevant to decision-making, which is not by Lincoln, was informed decision-making comes from a long tradition of guessing and then blaming others for inadequate results. Clearly, when the bond was passed in 2017, in addition to lots of remodeling of our existing schools, the promise was to open a new elementary school in the fall of 2019 and also to build that new school in the northwest part of town. As is known, many pieces of property were looked at, and then it became obvious a few months ago that no matter where we built, the new school was not going to open in the fall of 2019. We settled in February on the Hayden Lake site, in my mind, for 3 good reasons. 1, we had no other property to build on at the time. 2, there was an outpouring of support to build on the old Hayden Lake school site by staff, parents, and community members, at least in Hayden, including support from the Hayden City Council. 3, development costs are cheaper at the Hayden Lake site because the infrastructure already exists as far as sewer, water, etc. Our budget to build a new school is very limited, and due to the good economy and because contractors are not hungry for business, construction costs have been coming in much higher than we originally budgeted for. What has changed in the last 5 months is we now have property in the northwest part of town. We will also have more property that we soon intend to purchase over near Hutter Road. That's not a secret, it's something we've talked about publicly. The property will be about 30 acres or so and will be large or larger, and will be large enough to meet our property needs for new schools for a decade or more. I want to say that I strongly reject some of the accusations that the school board has not been transparent or we have been carelessly ignored the will of the voters. I think we have made the right decision in February based on the circumstances at the time. My vote 2 weeks ago to delay consideration of the Memorandum of Understanding with the City of Hayden until the meeting today was based on the assistance of Trustee May that the community once again be given more time to consider the implications of the MOU. I am unwilling to write off the Hayden site for a new school, but I also hear the arguments and pleas from many people whom I respect that we build on the Prairie site first in order to fulfill the part of our pledge to the voters when we pass the bond. We clearly don't have money to do both right now, but perhaps we could. Since we know we need 2 new elementary schools sooner rather than later, with the community support, a plant facilities levy or a bond to be run this fall or as soon as possible for additional money to build on both sites, we should delay the MOU until that question has been answered. What is the level of community support right now to resolve the problem by giving us the money to build 2 new schools instead of just 1? I am in favor of building on the Prairie site, particularly if we can afford to, and at this point, I don't have a problem with it being the first one we build on, if we can only build 1. However, I think we can afford to build there and in Hayden at the same time if the community agrees. Some people have told me that the school board will lose the trust of the community if we do not build on the Prairie site first. Maybe there is some truth to that. And as I said, I'm no longer opposed to that plan. However, I have a hard time believing that the good people of Coeur d'Alene, who have historically supported their schools and who have been very generous, are going to punish the students by withholding money for new schools if we can show the need. Since apparently there's no rush, I think it's prudent to delay the adoption of the MOU and the land exchange agreement with the City of Hayden until we've had a chance to find out from the community if they would support giving us the funds to build 2 new schools to open in the fall of 2020, one on Prairie and the other in Hayden. And therefore, I have a motion. And I was told that this has to be relevant to the MOU, which it is, and if it's not, we'll work on the wording. I move that the school district table for at least 60 days adoption of the MOU and any agreement for land exchange with the City of Hayden while the school district gauges community support for running a bond or plant facilities levy this fall to build 2 new schools to be located at the Prairie Avenue and Hayden Elementary School sites. That's my motion. Is that excuse me, is that a legal motion?
My only suggestion, if I may interject, is because the MOU is the only thing on the agenda for action, that the motion would be limited to tabling the MOU.
Okay, then I'm motioning to table the MOU, but I'm also making those public comments. I'd like to see the community
So let's
deal with this, give us feedback on this other issue.
I think what we can do, you have a motion to table the MOU. I
For
think
60
if
days.
we go through that, and then we can discuss your other ideas there, we can give some direction, kind of what our expectation is for the next 60 days then. And see where we go from there. So, is there a second on Trustee Hearn's motion to table the MOU?
I'll second.
Okay. So it's been motioned and seconded. Any discussion on that motion? And Trustee Hearn, can you just clarify, is it a motion to table the MOU or to table the MOU for 60 days?
Motion is to table it for 60 days while we gather this other information.
Restate the motion, please.
Restate the motion, okay. I move that the school district table for at least 60 days adoption of the MOU.
Period.
Huh? Period.
No, I think we're good. He's restated. You're okay with that on a second. Okay. Any discussion on Trustee Hearn's motion? Okay. So why don't we go ahead and vote on the motion, and then we'll move on from there with some direction. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All right. So let's work on some direction from there. Certainly Trustee Hearn had some ideas that he discussed in there. Do one of you ladies want to go next with some kind of your thoughts on it, and then we'll try to see if there's any consensus amongst the four of us.
Well, I'm not going to repeat what Tom kind of just wrapped up. So, but I will thank everybody for coming out here. This is what our community is about, right? Everyone coming out here being passionate and involved about educating our students. So I thank you first for coming out here and speaking to us, and for your emails. You all know that a lot of thought goes into every decision we make. You might not know as much thought that we put into it, where we literally don't sleep at night, or we're waking up in the middle of the night and jotting down thoughts and thinking we're headed one direction, and then, whoa, we're headed a different direction. But I assure you, each one of us up here puts a lot of thought into it. Our hearts are just as invested as everybody's out there. We are emotionally invested. I feel the emotions. I am. So I will just thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And I'm open to looking at what we need to look at to make sure we're making the best possible decision that we can make, because that's what each of us up here wants to do always. So thank you.
I think the board is probably very clear on how I stand on this decision, but I would really like to thank the community, and I would like to thank everybody who came tonight, took time out of their busy schedules, and all of those who wrote to us. Your opinion is very valuable to us, and we take it seriously. And I'd like to kind of recap some of the comments that I heard tonight. I was also part of the Yes campaign, and I felt lucky and privileged to live in a community that did support our bond campaign. I believe the really large question in the room is that we need 2 elementary schools. I hear the staff at Nexa, and I agree, we need 2 elementary schools. I don't believe that anyone up here is suggesting that your school be shut down and you should not be going to school there. I think we all think mostly about student safety and security, and how can we meet the needs of our district, and how can we best go about doing that. And it's been a difficult road for us. The one thing I would like to say, and kind of piggyback on Mr. Hearns, is I would like us to move forward in some direction. I think there's risk that we've discussed this for a very long time. I would like to give direction to Dr. Cook that if we're going to even discuss the Prairie property, that we get moving expeditiously, and it is a top priority. We can sit on the MOU, but we need to move in a direction. We know that construction costs are only going up. We've made promises to our community, and either way, I think we need to start building one school. Whether we decide to run a bond or not in the fall or the following fall, I would like to see us get going on at least one elementary school.
Okay, thank you, Trustee May. So I have a few thoughts, but I'm just going to piggyback on something you said there about the Prairie site. So as the board knows, and maybe the community doesn't know, but we purchased the Prairie site about 30 days ago. And at that time, that's all we've done, I guess, at this point, is we've purchased that property. There was some initial due diligence that was done as part of that purchasing process, but we certainly haven't been doing the work that needs to be done if we're going to build at that school. And that work would be annexing into the city, traffic study with the Lakes Highway District, and yada, yada. We've had a number of preliminary conversations there. So if we're going to continue the discussions on the land exchange or potential land exchange with the city of Hayden, are we also then asking that we start as quickly as possible and expedite that process, that we begin the due diligence on the Prairie site? And then this is going to have to come back before us again. We'll get to hear from more people to decide what we do with that information. So does that make sense? And that's what we're looking for.
Now, we have done some due diligence, so just so the community is aware. We've had an initial meeting with the city, and they've given us a go-ahead, brief green light. But yeah, I think there are things that we can do in the next 14 days to get this process rolling and get back with the community as soon as possible on what it looks like.
I'm sorry, 14 days?
Well, no, just what we're doing, what we're like giving them updates. Next time we meet, if we need to be better at.
Okay.
Chair Marshall.
Yes.
Not to add a lot of hot water on this, but I just would like to remind the board that we are currently searching for a director of operations as well. We do have the amazing Brian Martin in the back of the room, who is director of maintenance, but we also have a position that is posted, and that is just a consideration to be aware of. Just we're moving as quickly as we can, but we also want to make sure that we are bringing in the right talent to help us do this work as well. So just keep that in mind.
Well, if you're trying to get a sense of the board, I would agree that we should move forward also on the northwest, on the property on Prairie. But I also I do want the community, I would like personally, and I think the board would like, and I know feedback on this idea of two schools, and whether or not that's possible for us to run a plant facilities levy or a bond. And I know that's not on the agenda, but it is relevant to our conversation. It is relevant to our conversation here that I'd love to hear from the community what they think about this. And if we can build two new schools, both of them opening in the fall of 2020, that'd be wonderful. That would meet our needs, and that would meet our needs.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to add some other thoughts here, just things I've thought about over the last week, as we've been preparing for this discussion, and really over the last 12 months, 18 months, 24 months that this has been in front of us. But some concerns I have just as we move forward, and I think we need to tread lightly. I think we need to make sure the community is aware. But one of those is just costs in general. So as the board knows, and many community members may know, but we had lakes out for bid several months ago, and it came in 20 or 22% over budget. So we couldn't move forward with those kind of budget figures on that project. So we're now going through another process, and our hope is that as we move into fall, that construction bidding will be more competitive and that we'll have a more favorable price. But that may not happen, and we may be over budget on that project. And all indications I've heard from Mr. Barlow and from our folks at Architects West is that we may run into the same situation on this elementary school. So, the Prairie site, however you want to look at it, as far as cash, it's going to cost us more to develop that site because we we may have to put a stoplight in there. We have some sewer fees that we don't have at Hayden. And, I just think we need to be careful with our costs, because we could, run out of money before we run through these projects. So,
Can I clarify that? Because I think that's a little bit misleading.
Can I finish my thoughts here? So that's one thing I'm concerned about, and I just want to see as we move through this due diligence process, and I know it'll be part of it, but it's certainly that we complete that traffic study and we have a good idea whether a stoplight's going to be required or not, that we really nail down numbers with the city of Coeur d'Alene on permitting, sewer cap fees, and all those sorts of things. Two, I think about Bill's staff here and these folks, these parents that have talked tonight, and just what they've been put through. I remember that meeting where we made our zone changes and the emotion, how upset people were to be taken out of their school. And to see the job Bill's done in such a short time, to make those people believers, and now they don't want to leave Nexa. They don't, they have that family there, and it's a tribute to what Bill and the staff have done there, and it's pretty darn special. When we made that decision in May of, what was that, last year, I guess, 2017, there were 280 families that were impacted, or students, and we probably heard from almost every one of them. I know certainly Bill did. And 280 families were asking to stay at Hayden Meadows or at Atlas or Skyway, wherever that was. And after Bill talked to them and the staff talked to them, by the time July rolled around, that was eliminated. Those people weren't, they were believers in what Bill was trying to do there. And I just want to recognize Bill for that. And then also say that I feel for those parents and for those kids, because I hear what you're saying. We told you, bear with us. You're going to be there for 1 year, and then you're going to move to a brand new school. And now we've told you 2 years, and now we're telling you 3 years. And you may or you may not move to a brand new school. So thank you for your patience. You have bared with us like champions. And a lot of that, I think, is because of the staff sitting up here and because of Bill, because of what they've done for your students and the transformation you've seen in your students. So thank you for that. To me, Nexa's got to be part of the conversation. If we choose to build at Prairie, to me, they need to be included and allowed to go there, because that's what we told them. You're going to Prairie. In lots of the comments I heard this weekend, that's not what I saw. Some of the comments were keep Nexa at Nexa, build the new school, and eliminate portables. And I think I have nothing wrong with that. That's just not what we've talked about in the past. I think if we want to eliminate portables, and there are 22 elementary portables, and depending who you ask, we use 16 to 18 of those portables every day. We need a school right there just to eliminate portables. And we're growing, and we have 270 kids at Nexa that deserve the same amenities that we have at our other 10 elementary schools. I appreciate Trustee Hearn's suggestion that we at least have the conversation and we look, does the community support us? Do they support that idea? Do we need to eliminate portables immediately and build 2 schools? Could we build 2 schools simultaneously? Can we open 2 schools in the fall of 2020 or close to? So, I think that's a worthy conversation of the next 60 or 90 days also, because that's going to have a big impact. Something I was surprised to hear a little tonight, maybe I got it wrong, was just, we understand if you have to build at Prairie, keep Nexa at Nexa. I think that's an interesting conversation. If we can't, if we're building at Prairie, does Nexa want to stay at Nexa? Do we give Nexa the first right? They get to choose. Bill with his staff and his family, they get to decide. No, we want to stay here. No, yeah, we want to go to the new school like we were promised and like we've been planning to do. So, I think there's a lot of conversation to have around this, but we've got more work to do here to figure it out. I also want to say, just on busing and zones, we've got issues with that. If you look at Prairie and Ramsey Avenue, the southeast corner, those students go to Winton Elementary School. They ride a bus for 55 minutes to get to Winton Elementary School. If they're in kindergarten and they're in the overflow kindergarten class, they then hop on a bus for 15 minutes and go over to Bryan to go to kindergarten. At the end of the day, they leave 15 minutes early on a bus back to Winton, get on their Winton bus and ride 50 minutes home. So, there are lots of examples of students that need to be taken care of. And in the grand scheme of it, a 3-mile or 4-mile bus ride is pretty darn good in our district. We have kids that are on buses for an hour. And I understand no one wants to cross and you want kids to walk to your schools. At most of our schools, that just doesn't happen. And so I think we need to balance it. And when we open these schools, we can't just look at one area. We've got 10,700 kids to look after. And there are going to be tough choices. There's going to be people who are disappointed. And not everyone's going to get what they want, unfortunately. So,
Chair Morrisroe.
Yeah.
I just the passion, excuse me, the passion in the room is palpable, and I appreciate it. I would caution us that we're not noticed for this conversation. If it is to the board's liking, and we would like to have this conversation in a work session or a special meeting or something along those lines, we would be glad to accommodate that. I just think we need to be really careful because there's an awful lot of very important things that are being said now that I think would be really valuable for people to be aware that we would like to have this conversation. I think they'd like to hear it as well. So thank you.
I agree with you, but I think we can have the conversation to give the direction of what our next steps are. And if this is a conversation we want to take on, then there's work to be done. Just one other thing I want to mention besides our 22 portables is we currently have approximately 20 sections of half-day kindergarten, mainly in the north section of the school district, spread across 6 or 7 schools. If we even wanted to entertain the idea of going to all-day kindergarten across our district, or God forbid the state actually paid for all-day kindergarten and mandated that we do so, we would need 10 additional classrooms that first day. And I'm pretty sure I know where this board stands as far as support of all-day kindergarten. So certainly we could use classroom spaces that 2 schools would provide us today, and they would be full. 2 schools in fall of 2020 would be pretty awesome, but they would be full. So.
Casey said one follow-up comment, not on the cost of the Hayden School. We can talk about that later. But I would just like to tell the community that we have learned a lot, or at least I have learned a lot as a new trustee, and that is when we run bond campaigns and we make promises to the community and we make promises to schools and we recruit new principals and we ask families to transfer, those are big promises, and I am sorry that we are in the situation that we are in. And I know under the direction of our new superintendent and Jerry Anderson of Long Range Planning that we are going to get through this, and we will look to the future to make better decisions. And we will do our best to meet every promise that we have made. And when we run that next bond campaign, we are very clear about the promise we are making to the community. We're very clear in the campaign information that goes out. We're very clear in bond language, and we reach out to you and we give you the chance for input. So I will make you that promise tonight, and I know that we can do something in the future to make it right.
So if I could just interject and maybe just recap what I'm hearing in terms of the direction for the administration and making sure we're sticking to the MOU. It's been tabled and the board has agreed to that. And what I'm hearing that the board's asking administration to do is come back maybe at a workshop or very near future in a public forum where we can report on due diligence with both the Prairie site as well as the Hayden site with as many more details as we have with respect to both of those sites, costs, as detailed as we can get them to address traffic studies, permittings, annexations, everything that's at issue here, and other impacts that we might have in terms of portables and kindergartens and as many other outside issues as we can address in that. And that's what I'm hearing the board's asking in terms of coming back with that discussion. Quickly as we
And
can.
yesterday, too. Can we
Right,
get that
right.
yesterday? Well, thank you for summarizing that. Board members, if you have additional needs, additional items you would like to see for that workshop or a regular meeting, we'll work on getting that scheduled as soon as they can get their arms around this. But be sure to communicate those either to Dr. Cook or to myself, and I'll push those through to Dr. Cook. And we'll make sure we can get as much information as possible and get things going. So, okay.
Day one, guys.
They're all like this, just so you know. Okay, we've got Trustee Hearn, did you have
Well, I was
something
just
to
going to say, as far as the issue of two schools, I know we're not, are we going to include that in a workshop or something? Or what, or how do you want to address this issue? I think we
Yeah.
should address the issue at some point, whether it's another meeting or whether it's a,
Yeah, I would guess we're going to need the gift of time. I doubt we could have this ready to go in a couple of weeks, so I would assume that we're looking at a special work session in August probably is the kind of the idea I'm thinking. And it would just be, hopefully we would have enough detail on both sites and what moving forward would look like, the mitigation of mobiles, the impact, what it would take for full-day kindergarten, those kinds of things, just to give you some preliminary indications of what paths forward we might be able to choose from.
so that's within the 60 days. So possibly we could have enough information to the community, you know, within the 60 days for them to make the decisions about whether or not they want to support
Yeah, I think so. I think
high facilities levy or bond.
I think it would be wise of us to discuss updates at the next board meeting, at the next regular board meeting, where we are in current state and how things are moving forward. But do that in a kind of a preliminary fashion, just a quick update of current state. And then I would assume that, that's almost 45 days. We should be able to have some pretty good detail put together for third week of August, something along those lines, and give you an update on that. And then, when it comes time to, and that would just be a notice of information. There would be no action at that time. It would just be providing information for the board's consumption. We'd welcome anybody that wanted to come in, but there wouldn't necessarily be action unless there was something along the normalized timelines of things that we would find out through our investigation, and we would also notice that as well. So.
What I will say, I guess, is in order to proceed on the first elementary school, the one that we have funding for, just say we need to make that decision as soon as possible. I know we've got some due diligence to do that, but a bond or SPFL type question might take a little longer to answer, but I think it'd be nice by September, if we could, by our board meeting, to try to have a decision on Prairie or the Hayden site.
Okay.
It'd be nice.
Yeah.
You got Labor Day in there, so it's a week
both,
later.
right? Or both.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Take a break here pretty soon.
Yeah, let's get through these action items here, and then we'll take a quick break. How about that? So next up is action item B, which is just approval. This is an annual thing here, so approval of our board-appointed advisory committees. And I believe the only one in front of us tonight is just our ad hoc literature committee. Does that sound right, Dr. Nelson? So is there any questions for Dr. Nelson on this? If not, this is on page 84 of our packets. And, oh, okay. But we don't, Dr. Nelson, when do you anticipate this board, or this advisory committee meeting?
Chair
Starting.
Morse, Superintendent Cook, members of the board, this is an ongoing work. So it will actually be most likely beginning in the months of October. Once we identify the current scope of novels and those that are being used. We are on a brand new curriculum adoption cycle through secondary with the new adoption that you approved in June. So I'm not quite sure how to anticipate that yet, but I do anticipate some initial work in October.
Okay, so board members, maybe I can make this suggestion since we're a person down, and this committee won't be meeting till the fall. Can we wait till September to look at all of our board committees and make some decisions then who's going to do what? Because we'll have long-range planning, we'll have this, and whatever else might come up. Okay? Are you okay with that? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yes.
just approve.
So, is there a motion to approve the following members for 2018-19 ad hoc literature committee? And members are presented on page 84 of your packet.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion in regards to this? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Next up, we'll just get through these action items and we'll take a break. So next up, action item C is a number of policies. We saw these policies last month. for information, and now they're back for action. There were a few comments received on one of the policies, the 3510P, administering medicines to students. Any questions? That was Nurse Nicole that,
Came,
went through all that information with us. She was unable to be with us tonight.
Yep.
Dr. Roscoe's pinch handy.
I thought it looked great.
Okay. I thought it was great. It was great to get the Association of Diabetic something, that they looked at our policy, commented on our policy, and actually had some suggestions for it. I thought it was great.
Dr. Roscoe, I had a quick question. So when we designate the non-medical person to be the administrator of medications, do we have a procedure to train them? Probably in there a different spot.
We have a pretty rigorous procedure to train them. And so there will be office personnel in each school who will be trained to be these UAPs who can administer. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Roscoe. The other policy that was in there was 7400 and some associated policies. If you remember, we are changing the policy there where it needs board approval from 25,000 to 50,000. And we had a discussion last month, and they put the language in there that they would, there would be board notification at the following board meeting on any purchase between 25 and 50.
Yes.
Okay. So is there a motion to approve the policies and procedures as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. Why don't we take a 5-minute break here, and then we'll get back and going. all for sticking around, that stuck around. Let's go ahead and reconvene. And we are into our information items. I mentioned earlier, just our agenda looks a little different. We swapped action and info, and we're going to handle info items a little different here. Dr. Cook, I'll hand it over to you and let you walk us through.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Thank you, Chair Morse-Rowe. First of all, I'd like to thank you for entertaining this new structure of the meeting kind of structure. Typically, as the board's employee, I would aspire to be able to answer every one of the questions that you guys would have. So it's my job, and that's what I am expected to do. On the rare occasion, after it's not just my first day, that I can't answer your questions, or if there are needs for it, I would like to be able to ask my staff to defer to them to either do presentations or to answer those. So the goal that I would ask in this transition time is a little bit of grace as I learn my job. And secondly, to remind the board and staff that they're my staff and I am your employee. And so that'll help, I think, with some of the structuring. It's probably a good thing that this is a July meeting, and about 90% of the staff is on vacation, so there's no pressure there either. But that's the nature of why this agenda looks a little different. It also tends to make things move a little quicker because typically your crowd is there to see the action items anyway, and they want to see that stuff. And we don't, if there are ways that we can accommodate them and not make them sit around and wait on our work, then we would like to do that as well. So thank you. The first one is the finance report, which would typically now be Katie. She's on vacation, and so really what I would like to do is I'm going to do that in her stead. And like I said, I've looked at it enough, and really rather than present the current state, I would just like to say, first of all, if there are any questions. It's pretty typical. She asked me if she wanted me to wait until the next board meeting, and I said, no, not for this one. It's just a monthly report. If you guys have any questions, I'm glad to entertain those or throw them to one of my staff members who's sitting in the back going, oh my God, I can't answer any of those right now.
Dr. Cook, just generally speaking, with this new format, if we look at the board packet and we have questions, would you like us to direct those to you and then you'll reach out to your staff, or what is the best?
Thank you for that question, Trustee May. The way I would prefer is, and actually would prefer this, the second that you have questions of any type, including things like you asked earlier in the evening about the property or the Hutter situation, any of that kind of stuff, start shooting those to me readily, and we'll see if we can have some of that stuff answered and available for the board, even prior to, and if not, we will definitely share those at the board meeting as best we can, so that those are available for everyone. Anything that you see once the board book is posted that you'd like further information on, or if you anticipate that, shoot me an email or let me know, and I'm glad to run that down. If it's not me, then I might farm it off to staff, but basically we will work on those things just as soon as we can get those together, but use me as your point of contact.
Dr. Cook, just to jump in on that, I think over the next 30, 60 days as we're doing some of our board development work, that's when I think we need to have some more discussions. We've, particularly me, have developed some bad habits over the last year and a half as we've had transitions and people moving, and I think we need to get kind of a little more organized process when we're asking questions and making sure we're running those through Dr. Cook and not asking a staff member to even though we're not asking this, but if they get a question from us, they're dropping everything they're doing and they're doing those, they're answering those questions. So we just got to figure out our chain of command, and we'll do that over the next little bit of time here.
It would be it would be to staff's benefit. It would be to my benefit. It would be to the board's benefit if there was no direct communication that skips the superintendent. There was actually a question that I didn't even know was asked of a staff member, and until we get, and especially until I get my legs under me, it's going to be imperative for me to know what's of current interest and of want for the board. And likewise, if staff would be expected not to reach out directly to board members without notifying me as well. And so just that courtesy of helping us all function most appropriately, I think would be good for all of us, and it'll definitely help me assimilate into the district quicker.
Okay. Any questions on the finance report? comment I would like to say, and I wish Katie was here just to hear it and be part of it, but, you know, it looks like we've done a nice job of just bringing things back in as we've transitioned into the end of the year. I know we were, you know, looking to be a little low on revenue and high on expenses, and, you know, we've cleaned that up. I know we had some pleasant surprises on revenue, and now we've tightened up those expenses too, and they're tracking, you know, right on budget or a little below budget. So thank you to her and everyone else.
Yeah. And I'll at the end of the meeting today, one of my later reports, I've got a little bit of talk about the restructuring of the superintendent's cabinet and membership, and I'll talk a little bit about Katie and her new role moving forward as well.
I did have a question, and now I'm trying to find where it is on here. And I think it was professional development, and it was a little bit over, and I was wondering if that was because maybe the new math curriculum, we were doing some professional development extra.
Now, actually, I do think I know the answer to that. And right now, that's just a timing consideration. It's just at the end of the year, it's making payments and making sure that those things are finished. Right now, there's we're doing just fine with the budget. I apologize. Let me look real quick. She did talk about this one. I apologize. I can get back to you on that one. Okay.
It's your first day. We'll let it slide. Okay. Any other questions on the finance report? All right. Go ahead, Dr. Cook.
All right. On the construction report, I'd love for Brian Martin to please come forward, Director of Maintenance, to give you guys an update. And I do believe that we've got a little bit of a slideshow with some updates that we're going to be showing while Brian's doing his report.
There we go. To start with, we'd like to set up a tour for the board, and if there's any other people that you'd like to bring along to look at what we're already doing at Lake City, Coeur d'Alene, and Dalton. So I'm thinking that the best time for us to do this is probably the end of this July, first part of August, because you'll see more than what we have right now. So this one right here, this is a from the starter right here. That is Dalton. Dalton is all framed in, and they have done really well on that project, and they're going forward. I'm having a hard time. This is Fernand Loop. Fernand Loop is on budget, and we'll be probably wrapping this up in probably 2 weeks. They're way ahead of schedule, and so they look like they're wrapping the whole thing up. And like I said, it's on budget, so we're feeling good about that. Dalton, this is the exterior, another shot of it. That's the classroom, and then off to the left, that is the new stage area. There's another shot of the classroom. And that is the new stage area inside the building. Lake City is really, I think of all of the projects right now, this one is going the fastest and probably the cleanest of all of them. They've got just about all their block up on the classrooms right now. Their floors are poured. They're really doing well. I think in the next picture you can see that's the new gym. There are 20 blocks up already. So it's really going to be positive. I think that they're going to, knock on wood, I think they're going to be a little ahead of schedule by completion. So that project has really done well. Coeur d'Alene, that's our classrooms. We've had some struggles on this project, but it's and that's just the way projects go sometimes with construction. It turned loose here last about 2 weeks ago, and things are really starting to flow. That's the new addition with the 9 classrooms, 8 of them finished, and one that isn't finished yet. We're going to leave that one low for the future. And so, but that's finally going really well. It's all framed out. Here's the interior. That's ductwork going in. That's always a good sign, because those guys don't like to put that stuff in until they know it's sealed up and watertight and that stuff. So that's always a good sign. Here's the hallway in that area. So it's all taped up, and before you know it, we'll be putting rock up on that. So, and here's quite the of the whole project. This is the one that gets the most eyes. It's the south end
of the existing gym, which is gone. And we have had a time with it. The windstorms that we've had have knocked that wall down a few times. Right now, as you can see, that picture is of a half of a wall. And so it's been a struggle. We've kind of given up on it, and we're just we're keeping the existing gym floor dry, because it seems like as soon as they get it put back up, we'll have 30, 40 mile an hour gusts, and plastic doesn't hold up to it. On the bottom, that blue part, that's where the concrete's going to be going in for the expansion of the gym. So the tilt-ups are going to be going in, the walls on the side. That's going to be happening here in about 3 weeks. So that's going to be pretty exciting. So, and that's the part that I think that you guys would like to see, is when we get those tilt-ups up and get into that gym to see what it's going to look like. That's from the inside looking out. Thunder clouds in the skies, you know. This is pretty amazing. If you haven't, this just happened. This is the front new entryway, and you can see the big V on the bottom. And above that is the roof that we're going to walk underneath for the new addition. So that's a big part of that whole entryway. So they got the steel up last week, and they got that big deck up on top. And like I say, that if you notice, the V is right in the middle of the entryway as you walk in. So everybody's getting excited about that. So that's the bond picture on that. Just a little update for everybody. We'll have our tours. Dalton right now, we are billed out about 14%, and we're running at about 2% of our contingency, which is great. Now, we haven't had hardly any change orders on Dalton yet. Lake City High School, we're 13% billed out, and we're running right now about 38% of our contingency. And that one's a little bit higher than the other ones because we had a lot of dirt work to do, and we found everything. On other meetings, you guys have heard that, you know, we found a 10,000-gallon septic tank that cost us a couple bucks to take care of. So, but it's still on track. Our contingency is good. Like I say, the biggest part that eats up our contingency on these projects historically is always in the dirt. We are out of the dirt now, and we're going up. So I feel real confident on that one. Lake City High School is 37% billed out, and they're 34% of their contingency. Lakes, the RFQ has been put out and published. We will be closing that. We advertise, Lynn, one more time, I think this week, I believe, right? Anyway, the RFQ will close on July 12th. I'm sorry, Lynn, I did. So on July 12th, and that is for the CMGC project at Lakes. Hayden Lake, the gym, as we talked about before, and that is already done, and we have about $21,000 worth of money left over on that project. So that one's doing well. I think the biggest thing is that I know that was a long meeting today where you guys were talking about all this stuff, and I really am glad that all these people showed up, and the discussion was very good, and you had some very good players in here discussing it. Time is money, and as fast as we can move on this stuff, the better off for all of us. And so just anytime we can save ourselves a week here and there, it makes a big difference. The biggest thing on these projects is always one thing. If the architects have the time for the detail, the project's costs will go down. Their contingency will stay up higher, but they have to have time for the detail. So we don't want to push them in a corner. So just kind of keep that in mind as we go forward with our next piece. So then we're really excited. Hopefully we get this, the Lakes project looked at, and I think that in September that we are probably going to start making some headways on that and working with a general contractor and our architect, and we'll get that one out of our hair too. So prices are still going up, but hopefully they're going to start flattening out. I think that everybody's about ready to bust, and so I think that things will flatten out. Hopefully, things are going to flatten out here in the fall. That's about it. If you have any other questions?
Just on, I know you've already told this probably, but on the Lakes project, so we're advertising for 1 more week and then it's going out. And do you have any idea of how many contractors or?
I haven't heard how many people have applied yet.
Okay.
I've heard 2 that are definitely going to apply.
Probably don't want to put that out until.
No. I was just curious if we, that you're feeling positive about it, what would be the next step? We could re-advertise it or?
Well, we're going to have at least 2 people that I know of right now. What we'll do is then we're going to set up an interview, and we'll interview everybody that's applied. And so we'll go forward with that. I'd like to have at least 1 board member on there to sit in on the interview. And if we like what we're hearing, and I'm hearing a lot of good stuff already, people want to do this for us. They want in on this thing. So it's the new way of construction. And so I think I'm real positive about it.
So an interview probably mid-August is what you're for a timeline.
I think, Lynn, we have it all scheduled out.
Yeah, there's a
but-
date on that. The contract they sent us or the advertisement has, there was a week of, it's towards the end of July, I think, that the interviews are scheduled to take place.
We didn't have anything, yeah. And then we had a break there because of August and so, but September, but, mhm.
I think it was August, wasn't it?
If I can interject.
August, we had to push it back a little bit. Yeah.
It's on the agenda for, well, the RFQ calls for September, for it to be on the September 10 board vote.
There you go.
And the interviews will be July 19th through the 20th.
Yeah.
And then one last thing. So classrooms completed for start of school, is that what we're hoping? Or?
We're pushing real hard, and everything that we're hearing is that, I know that Lake City and Dalton, I'm real confident. Coeur d'Alene has been a challenge because of all the stuff we ran into. But we had a sit-down meeting with our general contractor, and they basically just looked at it and said, we've never missed a date yet, and we're going to open up school with all the classrooms, and we're not about to make that not happen. So that was real positive, and they will. So.
Any other questions for Brian? Don't run away yet, I've got 2. On the elementary school, I think it'd be helpful for our discussion, our future discussion that we have coming up, maybe just working backwards a little bit on, okay, once you guys decide, then we need X amount of time for the architects
Yes.
to draw the drawings, and then we'd anticipate, so we need 90 days to draw the drawings, then we need a month to bid it, or, whatever it is, just if you could give us that information, so as that time starts crunching, we can say, okay, this is the target, we're trying to get a bid in, whatever it is,
As soon
X
as-
number of months so we can open the school.
Yeah, as soon as you can. What happens in construction projects is that something always happens at the last second, and you're delayed another 2 weeks, and that causes another 4 days. And so if you can, you got this out now for 60 days. If you guys make the call and we get going and get going forward, we will be able to hit some times. Scott from Architects West and John Mueller have worked really hard. They've actually, the building we're going to build at either location is the same building because of this whole thing with timelines and getting it done on time. But they have stopped because now we need the site to finish it. We can't go any farther on it. Again, it's not so much how much the absolutely minimum time, it's giving them enough time to do the detail. And I tell you, when it's pushed too fast, you just start seeing it's 5,000, 10,000, and it just keeps rolling in. So as soon as you guys can make a call, that's my opinion, because I think we need to be out there in March. We should be ready to go in February to go out to bid. In March, in the beginning, we should be going out to bid for it in March, and that'd be ideal. And if we can give them 90 days, you just work that back. So, like I say, if we can get it going. So.
Okay, then my second question is just on lakes. Are You said September we'll kind of get rolling on that. Do you anticipate some of that work being done next year during the school year?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think that we're going to be in a good shape. I sat down with several of the players that are applying, and they're asking me questions on this and that. See, we've already got the drawings done on that school because we already went out to bid on it. So that part's done. Now it's just going back in, pulling those drawings, sitting down page by page, and finding places where we can save some money, doing things smarter and better. And so that process is going to happen pretty quick. Then again, we'll be able to get that rocking and rolling in this winter, so they can start getting our subs lined up and stuff like that. So I think we're going to be successful on lakes. So.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Brian. All right. Item F, suicide prevention mental health initiatives. 2 weeks ago, I lost track already. It was a Monday, what, Tuesday?
June 26th.
June 26th. Last week. Okay. Right. Myself, Dr. Cottle, Dr. Roscoe, Trustee Hearn, and Trustee Trustee Morris Rowe, Board Chair Morris Rowe, attended a kind of an informational meeting of a plethora of community-based health organizations to start talking about suicide awareness in North Idaho. And a lot of good conversations came from it. And one of the things that was just, I think, an opportunity for us to take advantage of in the district was to start sharing what's currently going on in our schools in the lens of support, whether it's system-wide support or targeted support for students, or even intensive support, both in a preventative model and as an intervention-based model. And so we've talked internally to make sure that it would be good for us to share some of that information. And so we've asked the board's permission to do a more full and robust presentation later on in the fall, and a workshop on mental health. But in the meantime, we'd like to give you guys a little bit of a taste of what's going on in the schools. And if we could, I'd love to have Dr. Cottle come up and present some of the things that are going on in the schools, in actually across all of the schools, not just the secondary schools, but as a starting point for informing the community and you all of things that are currently in place, and maybe the ways that the community can partner a little bit and do a better job across our district. This is not a district problem. This is a community issue. And I've been meeting with individuals who want to be part of that solution all over the area. And so I'd like to ask Dr. Cottle to do a brief presentation just to start with on things that are going well right now. Thank you.
Well, good evening, Chair Morris Rowe, Superintendent Cook, and board members. With recent tragic events impacting our schools, community, and nation, we are re-examining our efforts as a district and community to better support the social emotional needs and increase our suicide prevention efforts. As Superintendent Cook stated, on June 26th, the cadre of district staff, along with board members, Casey Morris Rowe and Tom Hearn, attended a meeting hosted by Panhandle Health. The meeting included many mental health providers and organizations, and I will just name a few because you will see some of those health providers in the document before you today. Panhandle Health, Kootenai Health, Heritage Health, Children's Mental Health, and the Suicide Prevention Action Network, which we call SPAN of Idaho. And those are just to name a few. Also, the other school districts in our area were represented. Post Falls and Lakeland were there, as well as North Idaho College. At the meeting, we discussed what different entities were doing as far as suicide prevention, and we were looking basically to identify areas of overlap, areas where we can improve as a community, and areas where we can better collaborate. In August, SPAN and NIC will be hosting a suicide summit. They gave us a little teaser that it will include leadership from different entities in our community, and so when we get more information on that, we will share that with you as well. I would just like to say the district team, we are very passionate about participating in the summit and collaborating with our community partners. In your packet today is it's an updated copy of what we presented at the meeting, but I wanted to present it to you to basically for information and to begin the discussion regarding suicide prevention, but also overall mental health of our students. And I apologize, it's small for the audience to read. In your packet, it's on page 156. How we structured this, Nicole Piekarski basically puts us together with input from Dr. Kata Roscoe, myself, and Anna Wilson. And what we did is there's one column where it talks about proposed, and in that you'll see items where they will be new items that we're looking at doing. You'll see things that we're considering. You'll see programs that we're looking to expand, and then also things that we'd like to continue. And when I present today, there's probably some things that we may want to take off if we add some new things. The second column lists the intervention. The third column is tiers, and what tiers, different organizations use tiers, and we've talked about MTSS, RTI, and PBIS before in this district, and that's a whole bunch of acronyms. But what it means in a tiered system, Tier 1 means every single student experiences that. And so we always think of it as a pyramid. So in Tier 1, everyone it has access to that program. Tier 2 is another layer on top where we actually offer it to students that need that program. It's not necessarily for every student. It's just an extra layer for those that are still continuing to struggle or have some specific needs. And then Tier 3 is even more intensive. So a lot of times we think of it in education as Tier 1 is whole group, the whole classroom. Tier 2 may be a small group of students, and Tier 3 is really individualized. This document also goes through each program, the targeted population, the implementation staff, and kind of the implementation date. And so I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I want to go through and highlight some things. And then I will primarily spend most of my time on the first page, the suicide prevention, and then talk a little bit about the additional mental health programming, because that's the overall mental health of our students, which, you know, is also preventative when it comes to suicide. And then I'll entertain any questions. So the first one on there is a new tool, is a new proposed program, and one thing that we're considering is possibly doing a screening tool where we screen all students to see where they are, you know, with mental health and where they are with suicide. We did share this at our meeting with Panhandle Health, but the concern was if we're going to screen students, we need to make sure that we have the resources there to direct them to help them if for some reason they show up on our radar. So that's something we're considering, but definitely something that we will need community partner support. And so an implementation, boy, I can't talk, an implementation date, that's what happens when you try to talk really fast. We listed as fall of 2018, knowing that that's probably when that discussion will begin. A program that we're looking to expand is you approved the 2016-2017 school year, a high school course called Cope to Thrive. And Cope to Thrive was available at Venture High School students. And it's basically cognitive behavioral therapy support program for high school students and helps them deal with stress, anxiety, depression. It's basically teaching students how to cope. And we are looking at increasing the availability of that course and offering it next year at both Lake City High School and Coeur d'Alene High School. Students it's an opt-in course. They can receive one elective credit. Students can choose to take it on their own, or staff members can identify students and contact parents and encourage, you know, students to take that class if it's something that they need. QPR training is something that we've been doing quite a bit of, especially lately. In 2010, we really had a big push as a district with QPR, but we've never really circled back to do it, you know, and really intentionally. It is part of our 7th grade and 9th grade health curriculum, but we need to be more intentional. So this spring, we made sure every secondary teacher was trained in QPR, and our goal is next fall that every high school and middle school student will be trained in QPR, and then we want to develop a plan so that way it's ongoing. It's not just a one-shot wonder, that we're constantly going through and retraining staff and students. We've also partnered with Panhandle Health and members of the community to provide QPR training to members of the community and parents. Sources of Strength is a program that we are currently discussing expanding. In 2015, Lakes Middle School received a grant to bring Sources of Strength to their school. And what Sources of Strength is, it's basically what it says. It's a curriculum and it's a school-wide approach to changing the culture of a school to help students realize those positive things in their lives, those folks that they can look to, the people they can talk to when they're having issues and when they have stressful situations. So it's something basically preventative, and it's a building-wide effort, and we did implement it in 2015-16 at Lakes Middle School, but when we lost a staff member, that program basically went away. It is evidence-based, and it's something that we're discussing and looking at doing next school year. It does cost some money, but we have worked that in our Title IV grant. I have earlier this spring, I discussed implementing this with principals, but we still need to bring it to the building leadership teams. It's something that's very effective if it's implemented with fidelity. But in order to do that, we need to make sure that everyone is on board. The building leadership teams are there; they believe in it. Just like in the Simon Sinek talk, people need to really understand the why if they're going to implement it. Dr. Cook, I don't know if you wanted to add anything about Sources of Strength.
Just quickly, I would add that I came from a district in which 9 comprehensive high schools, each of those 9 high schools had Sources of Strength as an intervention model. And I would I can't emphasize enough, Dr. Cottle made the point, it really does require that community buy-in exists. And I think it's a great opportunity. We're actually, Dr. Cottle and I are going to be on a conference call with trainers in Denver tomorrow that do national training just to talk about possibilities and fit. I think there's a good opportunity here that we're looking into a little further. So.
And then earlier, and I know I'm talking fast because I know it's been a long night for you, we talked about there's some things we may want to take off the plate. We have done Wessler training for quite a few years, for 4 years. The information that I'm getting from the schools, it's really kind of run its course. We basically are capturing 30 students at a time and going through and doing just one training, but all it does is build awareness, but doesn't help students. And what do I do about certain situations? How do I help my friends? How do I help myself? What do I need to do? And so Sources of Strength is something that we would probably consider as the next step in replacing Wessler, and it would be something where we'd be able to reach more students. I'm going to skip over a few and then go back and highlight some of the mental health programming that also we would consider as suicide prevention, because the overall mental health of our students, is important, and it's a contributing factor. So on page 157, we have some of our additional mental health programming. We would like to continue the therapeutic support classroom, which most people know as Pathways. That's a program for students that are having emotional disturbances or difficulties. We do have individual and group counseling sessions through Family Support Services at 4 of our elementary schools, and that is through a collaboration with one of our community partners, Heritage Health. We've been using the Olveus anti-bullying curriculum, but the middle schools would like to continue that, but that's where Sources of Strength could probably give that a boost. You may not know, but we began implementing Second Step at the middle school as part of our ASCA program this spring. I'll be getting information from our counselors on how that went, and we would like to continue that next year. And that's really a social-emotional curriculum where the counselors go into the classroom and teach lessons to the whole class, and then they can work with groups of students individually if they're struggling with certain issues. We have Green Dot, which is a bystander intervention training at the high school. And then we also are partnering with Safe Passage, who provides advocacy for teens, teen dating and social media concerns, which again has been some of the issues that we've been struggling with our school safety and how to use social media appropriately and how to make sure that you're safe online. We would also like to continue our student threat assessment teams, level 1 and level 2, as well as district representation on those important committees out in the community regarding mental health for students. Some things that are new is Venture High School is partnering with the Idaho Youth Ranch to provide individual and group counseling sessions for students that do have need. And that's an area that we may also want to expand in the future if we are looking at doing some sort of universal screener for suicide prevention. We are also right now meeting with Mike Baker at Heritage Health to looking at how we can better provide individual and group counseling sessions at all of our secondary schools. And that's something that Chair Morrisroe brought to us and we're exploring. We have some new professional development that we've been that we're looking at. It's trust-based relational intervention practice training. That's a mouthful. So far, we have trained administrators, but we are now broadening that training to staff. And then there's a couple other items on there as well for you. And then the elementary is considering second step as well as a social-emotional curriculum. So there's a lot of information. Again, this is we're just dipping our toe in, knowing that it's going to be an ongoing conversation over time. And then I would entertain any questions that you may have or clarification, or because I talked really, really fast.
Trina, I just had a question. This is all fantastic information. I wish there was a way we could share it with the community more, because I know I hear a lot from community members, oh, what are you guys doing? What new programs do you have? What would be your opinion on the best way to get this information to our community members?
That's a great question. And actually, when we met on the 26th, that was one of the items that we talked about, because we found that there's a lot of organizations out there, whether it's a school district, whether it's a community provider, and I mean, we don't even know what's out there. And so we talked about that's one of our main goals, is probably to figure out who's doing what and how we can share that with parents in the community. Scott Maben was there, as well as some of the communication folks from the different entities, and I think that's one of the first things that collaborative group will tackle.
Yeah. My second thought was, I know you mentioned you're pulling a committee together, and if we could maybe ask for like a parent representation or a community member, just so they could, be there, hear it, see it, and pass it on. Would that be something that you think might be beneficial?
I think so. I don't know if you want to share with kind of what your thoughts were with that group that we were looking at doing.
Which thoughts?
Your MTSS, remember your MTSS for suicide?
No, okay. There's two things.
I don't want to steal his thunder. It's his first board meeting.
There's two different problems, and that is, first of all, building a model that the community can support that really is coherent and not kind of this hodgepodge. And we all kind of felt like, we're all working really, really hard, but we just don't have the oars all in sync yet. And so that was the first step. And then the second thing was that there needed to be a full communication plan that is going to integrate and really share that. And right now, while I agree it's just as critical and we need to do it, we're not ready yet, because we don't know. We're left hand and right hand are still figuring out what each other are doing. But the key piece was making sure that the model, first of all, was coherent and that it made sense to people. And I don't want to sidebar this, but I will say that I don't think this should be limited to just the community health-based organizations. There's a place for business leaders, for the faith-based organizations. There are places for everybody to get tapped into this. And I think once we get our act together and we make this a little broader but a little more sensical, and it has some coherence to it, it's going to be really obvious in the places where we can't do as well as other places, and that's going to be the way that we get people tapped in.
Because I think what was frustrating for all of us is that, as this crisis was unfolding, I saw how hard you were working, and I knew that, your thought process was helping students, but we couldn't relay that to the community, I think, and they didn't know everything that was happening. I didn't know it till I read this great document, so sharing that in the future would be fantastic.
And one of the big takeaways from the 26th is that's really one of the goals of that summit, and what they call it, the Suicide Summit in August, is to really get the leadership from the different entities and actually collaborate together and try to make sure that we all understand what everyone is doing, how we can coordinate efforts, and how we can communicate that out. Because it's not only a Coeur d'Alene school district issue, it's a community issue, but it's also a nationwide issue. I mean, one of the facts that they shared with us is last year, 2017, we had 29 confirmed suicides in the state of Idaho, and so far this year, they said 26, and I actually heard of one that happened yesterday. So I would say we're already at 27.
That was in the county.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I'd just like to thank you, Dr. Cottle, because I know that this has, been a difficult year, but I appreciate all your effort and hard work.
It's been difficult, and I think, there's always that silver lining when bad things happen, and it just reminds us that we can do better and we need to do better.
I would back up Trustee May's comments. People would, after some of these suicides got a lot of attention and set people back on their heels, whether they're students or staff or whatever, many times people would say, well, what are you guys doing? And I couldn't answer that question. So I think it's really important. And my background is mental health. I should have some idea. But anyway, it's really important that whatever we come up with, we roll it out in the fall in a very public way. I think that's really important for the public, for the public to know what we're doing, and for the students, and for there to be the resources available for the students as much as possible. My concern is sometimes that some of the training is optional. Maybe there has to be optional to a degree, but I'd sure like to see it. I like the tier 1 stuff where we're covering all the students. Mm-hmm. All the students are aware of what the QPR stuff is, or all of their students are aware of, some of the other programs we're doing, or ways to deal with suicidal peers, or whatever.
And I agree with you. We have one. It's really interesting that we have a lot of programs and a lot of things to help students and parents and families, but if they don't know about it, they're not going to access it. And so you can have all the preventative programs in the world, but if people don't know about them, they're not going to do any good. And so that's definitely, people need to know what we have there for them to help. They do. I don't know if my grammar is correct on that, but.
Just a couple comments I want to make, really related to that meeting on the 26th. You highlighted a couple of the organizations were there, but we also had the Coroner's Office, Department of Health and Welfare, State Department of Ed, the Idaho Lives Project out of Boise. So we had a few people out of Boise on the phone.
It was a big group.
It was a big group, and it was a big group to get a lot done. But it was some great conversation. I think just that communication piece was a big part of it. There's a lot of resources out there. That the various groups were unaware. There's some overlap, and then there's some gaps. So it's kind of dealing with some of that. And then I think also, just figuring out how to get the word out and let people know, make sure our people know, okay, if we have a referral, here's a place to go, or, maybe it's not to the KBH level. And we talked a little bit about that, is that we have a gap in our community, that you have KBH for kind of immediate needs, but then it might be 3 months before a student can get into counseling with a therapist. So covering that gap, and I think Kootenai Health said they were working on something that they hope to roll out very soon that's going to impact kind of that gap area that we talked about. But keeping that group together, I think meeting regularly and just continuing the conversation is going to be certainly part of the puzzle. And I think one thing that was nice to hear, at least for me, is this isn't a district issue. This is a community issue, and we need to band together and treat it as such. And if we don't, if we don't at least agree on some things and kind of speak a common language, we're not going to impact the community like we need to do. So it was nice to get that agreement, I think, out of everybody.
I just add one last piece. Well, actually, two last pieces, and I think that's. Look for more. We'll do a better job. We'll bring more to this when we get, September 27th, 24th? Yeah. We'll bring a little more attention, a little more detail to this. And I think that'll be an opportunity where when people start asking you, how can I get involved, we'll be able a little more effective at being able to connect people to the right places. That's the first thing, and I think we can all be a part of this solution. I think secondly, I think it's really important for us to start the conversation that this suicide happens, and the system, the perfect system in which the community is doing everything in their power, may not do everything to stop somebody from this act. And so I think it's really important for us to keep in mind that if or when it does happen, that have we done what we can, and can we continue to do more and get the oars rowing at the same time? That's where this really is going to have the larger impact. And if we've done our job, then we won't know, because people will have reached out and gotten that support, and that's what our goal is. But this kind of screaming that comes from the community of we should have done more can sometimes put us into a little bit of a tailspin. So we've got to stay on point with what is our purpose, what's our intention, and how are we going to get everybody on the same page.
Okay, thank you.
All right, item G, property updates. I believe we have Scott Mabin, our Director of Communications, going to present a couple of things to us, and he's got some new maps, I think, and just some things to share with us. We'll talk a little bit about this further. We actually kind of ventured into this conversation a little bit earlier when Scott was called out of the booth to answer a couple of questions. So I think there's some new stuff for him to share with you with regards to our current state on both a property purchase and the west boundary update.
Yes, thank you, Superintendent Cook, Chairman Morrisroe, and members of the board. As you know, it was just recently on June 21st that the State Board of Education had approved our joint petition to revise the district boundary line on the west border with the Post Falls School District. And over the summer here, we just have a few more steps that will need to play out before that becomes official. The Department of Education is now in the process of drafting an order of annexation, which the State Superintendent's Office is expected to issue next week, as we understand. Once we have that order in hand, the two school districts then would submit that order to the Kootenai County Recorder's Office, the County Assessor's Office, and the State Tax Commission. And these agencies will review that order, and then within 30 days, we expect the Tax Commission would correct its records and notify the school districts and the State Department of Education that that's been completed. So anticipating that we will continue moving forward on this timeline, we have a few actions anticipated for the communications around that. First, we will be sending a letter to all affected property owners, informing them of the state's decision and the process for the revised boundary to become official this summer. And I'll just remind you that it was about 175 property owners that we originally had notified of this process in the spring. So we'll reach out to all of them. And in addition to that, we'll do some special outreach to the families of currently enrolled in students that are residing within these affected areas. That's a relatively small number. We estimate there are 8 students potentially coming from Post Falls into the Coeur d'Alene district, and that would be largely on the north end, and then about 14 students who potentially could be departing for Coeur d'Alene. The communication with these families will include a reminder of the grandfather clause that both districts jointly agreed to, essentially allowing them the choice of which district to attend for the duration of their child's education in the area. It would include details on our school attendance zones, including for Atlas, Skyway, and Winton Elementary Schools. You'll see the current zones within the current boundary on the screen now. We'll include maps of that as well as the expected revised elementary attendance zones with boundaries extending west to Hutter Road, which you can see there. Basically straightens everything out and essentially extends the Atlas and Skyway attendance zones west to Hutter, and then down below, it's hard to see, but Winton would be coming in from the east, essentially along Hutter as well, with the exception of that tiny jog on the very south end next to the Spokane River that keeps the Mill River neighborhood whole. We'll also include contact information within the district office for anyone who has questions or concerns about the process, school attendance, changing from one district to the other if they so choose. So we know and we anticipate we'll have questions about this as it plays out, whether it's with respect to the attendance or other issues that people may want to know about, and we'll do our best to keep them informed and make sure that all these families and students are where they want to be when the school year begins in September. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Raven. I have a couple of questions, but does anyone else, you want me to go? Okay. I assume, so we don't know quite what the timeline is going to be as far as getting through all those approval steps with the state tax commission, the county assessor and all that, but we know it's going to happen eventually. So are we just, at this point, planning those boundary changes? So if a student called tomorrow and they were in Post Falls, now they're going to be in our new Coeur d'Alene, are we just allowing them to enroll? Or are we waiting for the official?
I think that could be up to the discretion of the districts, anticipating, again, that the State Department of Education has approved this, and it's largely a formality, perhaps, to play out with the various agencies involved. The most ambitious timeline, I think, would probably be that we would complete this around mid-September. But it could be later, mid-August. But it could be later in August, perhaps early September as well. But knowing that it's all moving in that direction, I think the districts probably could allow those students to start in the new school of their preference.
Right, it seems like that would make sense as opposed to saying, no, you've got to go to Post Falls and in 2 weeks, you come see us. To me, that would make sense.
Yeah, I think, if I may add to that, it's pretty logical, right? Well, the only thing that I think is even right now kind of up for grabs is the boundary between Winton and Skyway, right? That it's a continuation, and we'd have to determine what that continuation looks like because it doesn't currently exist, but it's kind of a logical continuation. And so just in that area that we're picking up on the north end of the Hutter line change, but I think the rest of it, a layperson could look at this and go, okay, now I'm in this area. It should be pretty simple.
I think you have a proposed idea, something that you guys have talked about? Yeah. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's what we're showing here.
That's what that depicts there on that
Sure.
slide.
Then my other question was just on getting this information out to the schools and making sure that those office folks, school office managers are in the know, because they're likely the ones who are going to get questions and calls on this, and just making sure we do that education piece with those guys.
We will, yes.
Okay. Any other questions for Scott on the west boundary adjustment? Or for Megan, who sat here to wait for this part?
It's great. It's nice to see a straight line there. After all the years of cutting neighborhoods and houses even in pieces. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Property purchase, we've kind of already talked about that to some extent. I think one of the things that we need to probably discuss at this point is just simply what our next steps are now that all but the T's being crossed and the I's being dotted. The property purchase is in the property of interest is now in the school district's boundaries, and so our next steps will be to continue conversations with Mr. Swallow to talk about what that might look like. All right, item H, design technology course pacing guides. I'd like for Dr. Nelson to please share that information with you.
Absolutely, Dr. Cook, Chair Morrisroe, and of course Dr. Cook and members of the board. You have, our trustees over the years have required course 780 of our 8th grade students. It's a course called Design Technology. And ultimately what it does is it entices them to choose many different pathways for career and technical education. The course was opened the same year that K-Tech was opened. And again, it was giving them an opportunity to see how the application of skills could pay off in future job and career readiness skills. We just recently had a retirement at Canfield Middle School. And because of that, the theme that Canfield Middle School had always been choosing changed. So they would like to move to more of a robotics CAD focus. And so what that did is give us an opportunity to take a look at the entire scope and sequence of that course. You'll notice things that are embedded in the course like career exploration. We've talked about career cruising. The college and career readiness pieces. It really is a conglomerative course. However, again, the sole intent of it is to talk about job and college and career readiness. So we present those changes for you tonight in information.
Any questions for Dr. Nelson on this? Oh.
They really liked the presentation. So
Will this course still be where they do their their high school four-year plan and all that
correct.
information?
That is still embedded within there. You'll notice the four-year plan is still a requirement of that, so they'll be exposed to career cruising for the first time, do their matchmaker, which allows them to take a look at different skills and how those could be applied, and they will start their four-year plan. Of course, as you have already seen, we've sent out parent notifications as well, so parents and guardians can log in and see their four-year plan and make some suggestions to it along the way as well.
This is a middle school elective course, is that?
It is not an elective. This is a requirement in our district. Students must take design technology as part of our middle school advancement. Correct. Is it an 8th grade course? Single semester.
Okay. Anything else for Dr. Nelson on this? All right. Dr. Cook?
Okay, I'd like to ask Dr. Nelson to stay put. We've got just a quick cursory look at our testing data results. And this is, I would like to iterate that this is a preliminary. And once we've got data in a little more formalized fashion and it's been vetted and we know that it's more accurate, we will do a little deeper dive. So this is just a kind of first glance at it. So feel free to talk about it as long as you wish, but every bit of this data could change. And so I'm not sure it's too much to dive into at this preliminary juncture. So, Dr. Nelson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cook, and I'll even underscore his comments a little bit in mentioning that some of the figures that you'll see on the screen are different from the time that I even put the presentation together. These are rolling numbers. So we will give you a little bit of a background as to two of the summative assessments that we provide at the very end of the year. I would also like to remind the trustees and the public that accountability is back in the state of Idaho. We were on a 3-year hiatus in the transition from the old ISAT to the Smarter Balanced Assessment. And there were some times, especially when the No Child Left Behind Act was rewritten for the Every Student Succeeds Act, that accountability, the way that schools are measured, was put on hold. That is back, however, for this academic year. So in the past, the state of Idaho ranked each of our schools on a 5-star scale. You may remember that. But there won't be 5 stars or 5 popcorn bags or whatever it ends up being. These schools will simply be rank ordered as part of the Every Student Succeeds Act. And I wanted to remind you that even though our teachers know of this, we should expect that scores will be finalized in August. And that's when all of this that I share with you today moves from preliminary to final results. And you can see some of the different things of how schools are being measured. It is not solely based on the results that you will see today. It is based on a conglomeration of measures, including on the left-hand side, how our students are growing to be able to achieve our goals. So not just how they perform in one singular year, but are they meeting their year-to-year growth goals? Are we closing the achievement gap? How are our English learners doing? And specifically, you'll see that science is brought into this. Science, for a long time, had kind of been left off the table. Well, science is back as part of this work as well. In addition, there has always been a challenge at the alternative level, that alternative high schools were always measured the exact same way as a traditional high school. And as you know, at Venture High School, we certainly have challenges that are being brought with our individual students in trying to get them back onto track to graduation. So you can see our alternative high schools now have their own measures that are brought into play. Each of these have weighted values behind them, and I won't bore you about that now. But ultimately in August, I'll be able to come back up to you again and talk to you about how our schools scored relative to the rest of the state. So let's break into two of the measures that we have here. The first is what we call ISAT in the state of Idaho, but it is the Smarter Balanced Assessment. Idaho is one of 14 different states that are included in a consortia, and they provide the assessment unilaterally to those states. We do not have other state results yet, but I will be able to share those with you in the coming months. As you take a look at this table, this represents each grade level up at the top of the x-axis and each subtest. A student in grades 3 through 8 and 10 are provided the ISAT in English Language Arts and Mathematics. We'll talk more about the challenges of the secondary again in a moment. The coloration that you see on the screen identifies grade levels and buildings that were below 60%, that would be the pink shaded cells. Those buildings that were above or at 60% and below 80%, that would be the yellow, and the green shaded cells would be above 80% proficiency on this year's assessment. I've even broken that down for you in a table over here off to the right-hand side so that you can see how it distributes. Now, although I would absolutely love to stand in front of you and talk to you about more green shaded cells on the screen, I can't. We're moving, but we're not growing as well as I would love to be able to see. Right now, 50% of all of our grade levels in 3 through 8 at our buildings are at 50% or 60% or lower. 40% right about there are within that yellow range, 61 to 79, and only 6 cells in our building, 4 of which are at Sorensen Magnet School of the Arts and Humanities, are above 80%. So what does this certainly mean? It means that we still have a lot of work to do. We are growing, and I'll show you some growth here in just a few moments. But again, when on the old ISAT, the much easier assessment, we were regularly in the 90th percentile, and I think our community has extraordinarily high expectations for how we perform. So when we come in and take a look at this, we're certainly not pleased, and we can certainly look at some buildings specifically that are red across the rows and know that we have absolutely some very pointed conversations that are already happening. But we are, oddly enough, still outperforming the state. And when you look at how the state is performing, our district is about 10% on average higher than the state of Idaho is performing in each of these grade levels as well. So although we as a community look at that screen and say, boy, that's just not good enough, we still are outpacing our peers statewide. And I am so sorry for you, Trustee May.
I just had a question up there, and I think I've got it. But so the below 60 is a 2 on the ISAT, is that right? And
it could be a 1 or a 2.
1 or a 2, okay.
The range that you're talking are called the proficiency scales, and unfortunately it's not as easy as we would like to say that a 1 or a 2 is going to get you a red cell up there. There are cut scores for each of the values that a student receives between a 2,000 to 3,000 range, and I can get that for you, but it does not go or clarify to the cells that you see colored. Mm-hmm. It does not match up.
But the pink designates that they're not at their proficiency level that they should be at for grade level.
Well, I would say anything that's not in green, I would say we have not met our expectations.
According to our continuous improvement plan.
Well, and then again, this is where we are at as a community. We've had multiple data summits and opportunities to look at our students' performance. And again, I don't think that anybody can sit in front of you and say that 63% proficiency is a good number. Again, we're doing well compared to our statewide peers, but again, I think we are growing. Now, the nice thing is, and I'll actually move to the next slide to emphasize this, we are growing, and our students are growing in both language arts and math. And you can see here it's fairly small on the screen, but 3 years ago, average students were 2466. This year's average students were 2545. So these students are growing year to year over and above in both mathematics and in language arts.
I have another question.
Go for it.
So the test is different every year though, so is your cut score going to change? You know, we see growth, but what if the cut score, you know, is a harder test this year compared to last year? Do we take that into account, or is that represented up there?
We're going to talk about that more in the SAT coming up here in just a few moments, but this is a computer adaptive assessment. It is not a static exam, meaning that a student's quality of score is actually more relative to the more difficult of the responses that they're getting. So as a student is taking the assessment, if you get the next question right, your next question is more challenging. If you get that question wrong, then you get an easier question. Each of the questions have values behind it, either easy, medium, or difficult, and ultimately the test is looking for an equilibrium. It's trying to find out where you are most likely going to make a correct response. But our students are growing every single year, and you can see that in the trend there. And I have it zoomed in, so it may not be as dynamic as it could be, but average growth for students is about 30 to 40 points per grade level, which is right around where we would like to see them. Again, I think all of us in this room would love to see that trajectory maybe a little bit arced higher, but our students are moving in the right direction. How are our secondary schools doing? We showed you the results for elementary. Unfortunately, there are no greens on the screen. And this is an area, of course, that we definitely need to improve upon. When I break this down for you, you'll see that 74% of all cells that are available in there are below that 60% measure. 26% are there, but this is an improvement over the previous years. Right now, we have about 55% growth in each of these areas. As you can see here, though, we definitely have some improvement, and we still are outpacing the state. In one area alone, we are not outpacing the state, and I bet you can't guess which one that is. But it's that dang high school math that we have talked ad ends upon. Keep in mind that we absolutely need to be turning that one on this edge for this next year. In terms of areas of need for us as a district, absolutely we're going to be focusing on secondary mathematics. And it is also my hope that we can really focus on the differences between how our instructional materials are being used. We have fully aligned materials in all of our grade levels in elementary through secondary. And I know that Superintendent Olson had talked a great deal about a curriculum audit, which would give us a great opportunity to be able to see how those materials are being used and measuring the qualities of instruction towards using those as well. I do think that that's an area that we can do better in, of having some fidelity classroom to classroom.
Do you think the reason why that we have that 28% for 10th grade, it's correlating to what our SAT scores? I mean, we're seeing some correlation, aren't we, unfortunately?
Absolutely. And both of the SAT and the ISAT measure the same thing. They measure the Common Core state standards. So you will not see a whole lot of difference between one or the other. And again, I think we've made a very systemic approach to how we would like to move secondary mathematics in the right direction. With your approval, we have our first group of students in Math 1. Of course, the goal would be able to see that moving forward as well. But also, Trustee May, keep in mind, we've talked about the challenges of the 10th grade ISAT before. That is an 11th grade assessment that in Idaho we give in the 10th grade level. So putting the positive spin on it for you, that means that at Coeur d'Alene High School, 38% of our sophomores are college and career ready already as sophomores. Again, taking an exam out of their grade level, but it's still not to our expectations. So with that, how are we growing in secondary? Well, I do have some good news for you that, again, our students are growing. This is a 4-year trend because we can't really measure a 3-year trend but we do have 4 years of trend. You will not see a trend into high school, however, because there is no 9th grade ISAT. So the trend line basically breaks. But you'll notice here from 5th grade up to grade 8, our students are still growing in the right directions. Questions on our ISAT preliminary results before I change gears to SAT?
I don't have any questions. It's just, it's
I
just sad.
I get disappointed. That's why I'm not saying anything. I sit here and I go, God, we can do better.
I don't think
Dr.
that anybody
Cook,
thinks
I'm-
differently.
I'm going to put it all on you. On your first day on the job, we can do better. For God's sakes, our scores are embarrassing at times. And I know I see the trend line, but it's not to me. I'd like it to be going up steeper. I mean, there's no way to me you can make it look good. It's just, it's not. And I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I'm just saying our job is to educate our kids and get our scores up, et cetera, et cetera.
Well,
And I know you're working at it. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I just every time I do look at this stuff, I get depressed. That's why I don't say much. Be honest. I'm just being honest.
Honesty is appreciated.
Well, Trustee Hearn, I wish I could give you more positives when we look at our SAT results. But unfortunately, I have more of the same. These results are extraordinarily sad to me. We have put a lot of effort into building some quality results in here, and you can see some of the things that we have done just in this last year to improve our SAT. And these are similar results which saw a 60-point gain 2 years ago. We had a horrible first SAT when the exam was revised. We made some changes and it paid dividends for us. Each of our schools now have growth plans. It's part of their individual SMART goals, as part of their continuous improvement plan. We've brought in teams of teachers and revised content and revised assessment and brought more content from the SAT in. And we went right back down to where we started. This last year, we are at a 998. This number is going to change, however. I'll talk to you about that here in just a few moments. One of the benefits of this year is we got more kids to take the SAT. That was last year about 86% of our students sat and took the SAT on the SAT school day. This year about 94%. So our efforts to promote the exam and to create an environment that students could perform well did there. But you can see here in the longitudinal of the 3 years that the SAT has been revised, we have gone down quite a bit. 993, our very first year of the new SAT, went to 1,044 last year, and then back down to 998 for this coming year.
Dr. Nelson, how do those numbers look when you're looking at the individual schools?
We're about to share that with you here in just a few moments. Actually, I didn't. Coeur d'Alene High School is outpacing, and you can see up there at the very top. Coeur d'Alene High School is outpacing Lake City High School 1048 to 995. In previous years, that has stayed true. It's been about a 40-point difference over the past 3 years for each of that. Ventura High School also this year was at 763. And that number specifically is going to change because for whatever reason, in our packaging of the exams at Ventura High School, 6 students did the preliminary bubbling of all of their name and demographic information, and that incomplete exam was put in the to be scored pile. So as you can imagine, they had a 0. They had a 200 on their assessment, which is the lowest possible value. We have just received email this evening that those 6 exams are going to be canceled. So those scores will go up, and we'll certainly see that at Ventura High School and reflected in the district results as well.
Okay, thank you. I guess my question was, are we seeing a similar trend line at all 3 schools where their scores went up and they were all down this year? Even though there's separation between them all, they were down across the board.
Well, and I can even emphasize that even further. 18 of the 20 largest school districts in the state of Idaho dropped this year, and dropped quite a bit, which would lead psychometrically to the fact that this exam this year was a more challenging exam. Unlike the ISAT, this is a static exam, so every student in the state of Idaho gets the exact same SAT on that day. So it could certainly point that this year's mix of questions were more challenging than what we've seen in the past. The other challenge with that, however, is unlike the PSAT, where we get all of the questions back and we can look at how our students are performing relative to standard and we can make instructional adjustments, we don't get to see the exam anymore. So it's going to have to be built on our faith that what we are doing is working well instructionally, and put our best foot forward come April of this next year. One of the things also that we did this year is we asked our students how they felt about going into the exam. And you can see off to the left-hand side of the sample size who returned, almost 62% of our students said that they were prepared to take the assessment. And 75% of them said that they were given opportunities either in class or out of class to do extra preparation for the assessment. But unfortunately, again, it didn't pay off for us. When you take a look at some of the distributions here, the yellow bar would be harder than expected. Most of our students said that the no calculators section in mathematics was more challenging. And in fact, as part of our Math 1 work, we took a lot of the PSAT content and built that into the curricula for Math 1. So again, we're trying to build that a little bit more. But math overall, if you look at the calculator allowed and the non-calculator allowed sections, the two yellows are larger than both reading and writing and language. So that has been a focus in there. But most people along the way said that the communication was adequate about the expectations of the exam, that the environment was good. It's just that it did not turn into positive scores for us.
Dr. Nelson?
Mm-hmm.
I notice a pretty significant discrepancy between the preparedness and feeling like they saw what they were expecting to get between reading and math. What would you, your best guess, attribute that difference to? That's the first part of the question. Second part of the question is, have you done this set of kind of qualitative questioning in the past, and how does that compare?
We have. If I may take question 2 first. We have done this same questionnaire for the past 3 years. And for the most part, the preparedness and the provided opportunities were very low. So we have increased that. We now have access to 6 full-length practice exams for students, either on paper or online. We have instructional supports available through Khan Academy for every student based on their PSAT results. We've really beefed that up. And for instance, at Lake City High School, they have an SAT question of the day. They do it on their announcements, and their first period class or second period class, whatever it is, goes through and talks about it. We've really tried to embed the work of the SAT and college and career preparedness into the day-to-day operations of the district. The second is, what do I attribute, your first question, what do I attribute the difference between that in there? I think it's still a cultural gap that we have. The SAT is provided for students. We try to make it great, but there are absolutely some students who do not take it seriously. And so what we've tried to do is build that to them and remind them that whether you are college and career ready and whether you're choosing to go right into the workforce or that using these results means something to you. And spending time when we get the results back with students and talking to them about it and what that really indicates to us from the PSAT all the way through the SAT.
And that plays out in a discrepancy between language arts and math?
And in terms of language arts and math, I think our language arts curricula is a little bit stronger right now than our mathematics, for one. We have actually built a lot of the writing components in from the SAT for years. But in math, we are reorganizing the whole thing.
Okay. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I have a question for Dr. Cook. We've been talking a lot about data, and we did all these deep dives this year, and our community was great, and they turned out. But now we have the data, some new data in front of us, and I guess my question would be, where do we go next? You know, I feel like we have an obligation to the community to say, we have a problem here, because we're demonstrating from, K through 5 and then middle school onward that many of our students are not either at grade level or on a SAT, not career and college prepared. Where do we start the conversation, and how do we go to the next phase?
Yeah, could you go back one?
Absolutely.
Yeah, the first thing I would say, I think it's a challenge anytime we're talking about a single test in time, but there's obviously some things here that tell us a story. What was the total test population? I forget, was it about 700 students for 3 schools? The fact that we only have a sample size of 118 students that are telling us how they felt they were prepared, that's a question I'd want to know more information about. I think there's some digging into the difference between language arts, ELA, and math as far as why that might feel. And I think even math teachers could have a conversation about that. I think there's a lot here. I'm not going to dare try to diagnose on my first day what the next steps are, but I think, anytime you are I'll just say this just as a food for thought and drop my glitter bomb and then run away. Anytime that you are doing a longitudinal comparison on a test that's not static, you set yourself up for a situation, because then you are comparing scores that are actually not comparable, quite arguably. And so I think it's just what you look to is that's why they talk about things like percentiles and those kinds of things, because you wind up trying to translate comparability. I don't want to talk about statistical analysis now, but the first question I would have is potentially building out the kind of qualitative stuff we're doing with our kids to find out where they're at. If just even in our 118 kids that chose to fill this out, a third of them, a little over a third, I think, didn't feel like they were prepared. Well, the first question I would have is, my gosh, if what I just heard is true, why not? Did they choose not to take advantage of it? And if so, then why? Maybe this, it doesn't matter to them. And if it doesn't matter because their path is X, then that's an entirely different conversation. And I think what we've got to determine here is, I'm a guy who believes wholeheartedly that it's very important to make sure that your tests are representing the performance of your district. However, there are kids that are going to take a test that are no longer valuing that test, and you'll see that trend as kids go through. Every third grader in the world wants to knock their test out of the park, right? Because it matters to them. And then some of those high school kids want to knock it out of the park, the ones that know I'm going to university or I'm going to college or whatever. And some of the kids that aren't going, it does not matter to them. And so we shouldn't make assumptions about whether or not this was a cumulative picture of what all kids are capable of and that we failed them. And so I think before I would say let's throw the baby out and everything and start over, I would want to know more about what is there.
I should be more clear. I wasn't really referring to the SAT because I think it is a hard test to evaluate. I'm more worried about our ISAT scores and just looking at some of the trends that we're seeing middle school onward, and really just, and not even specifics, because would never ask that of you, but just as we plan the year and we look forward, what are some workshops that we could do to get parents involved, to hear this data, to sit down and say, hey, we want to help you, but you have to be a part of the conversation. It's not going to be one easy solution to some of these scores we're seeing, but thinking ahead and planning what the year looks like as far as workshops and rolling our sleeves up. And we did the data summit and it was great, but let's go to the next phase because we kind of promised the community that. And what does that look like? I'm not sure, but I think a lot of it's education and awareness and
I completely agree. And I think the conversation is the now what. Let's talk about this. Now what? We know what we want. We know what we value. And if we're going to say these are the things we value, then we got to stand by that. And so I think that's part of it is for this group collectively to say we value certain things. It's no different than the conversation we had just a little while ago about suicide prevention and mental health awareness. We have to have a coherent plan moving forward, and just throwing some more mud at it is not going to fix it. We've got to make sure that we all are in agreement and we're going to attack this in a very systemic way. Sorry, that's the best I got on the first day. It's going to be a point.
Very briefly, Chair Morrisroe, I did want to remind both you and the public that all of our exam results are updated regularly. I do recognize the interest in our community in these results. They are always posted at our district website under the menu of departments assessments. So any patron will be able to go in and see the top-down views on any of the assessments, whether it be Smarter Balanced, ISAT, or the SAT.
Dr. Nelson, I'm also a little worried about when you get this ranking. Is it going to be ranking our elementary schools against each other? Because I have
Correct.
concern for that.
Correct.
So it'll
That
be...
is part of the Every Student Succeeds Act. That
So
is-
it'll be a state ranking, this is the top elementary school in the state, this
Correct.
is second, this is third.
Correct. It'll be just a vertical ranking, straight up and down, not a 5-star or anything in no range. It'll be from top to bottom. Coming
Based off a
soon.
number of factors, not just test scores, but test
Correct.
scores
That was
being
that
part of it.
table that we had showed you, and there is another element to that as well, which brings in everything from parent and student surveys to other non-quantifiable elements as well. So I'd be more than glad to provide you the entire list of metrics if you would like, so you can take a little look at it.
And this presentation was nice.
No, of course, yes. Is there anything else I can provide for you this evening?
All right. Thank you, Dr. Nelson. Okay, next up, we've got some board policy that is coming to us. These are ISBA recommendations, and in the interest of time, I'm just going to say, these are for information. We'll see them back for action next month. Does anyone have any comments, questions, concerns on any of them for tonight? Okay, seeing none, I think we're brain dead at this point. Okay, so next up, Dr. Cook, is you. That would be item K, which are just some cabinet personnel.
Yeah, just item K, just wanted to update. It's been a little bit of a reorg, not a lot, but a few job descriptions have changed. We've had 3 resignations on cabinet. Just wanted to inform you of those. Of course, you're aware. Amy Clark, Director of Special Ed, resigned her position. Anna Wilson, Director of Federal Programs, I think, and 504 Coordinator. Is that right? Yes. Has resigned her position. And Chris Shipley, Director of Finance and Operations, maybe, was the title. All 3 of those positions, all 3 of those individuals have resigned their positions and have moved on to other things. And so we took the opportunity. First of all, we've hired Frank Meyer as Director of Special Education, and he started his first day today. He is in the district and is working. And we also hired Kate Keinert. That's fresh off the news. The staff, we haven't even notified staff yet. She had her first day today and actually met. Her title is also Director of Title Programs, 504 Coordinator, and she spent much of the day with Anna Wilson just getting up to speed, just learning. And then if you recall, we split the Director of Operations and Finance into 2 separate director roles. We I think, are going to wind up with a little bit of cost savings by splitting those 2 jobs. And it'll also split the work. In the Director of Finance position, we are actually, Katie Ebner will assume that role, and it will be a narrower viewpoint. She'll just be working in the finance area. And then we've got the Director of Operations posted, I think, for about another week, I think it's available. And so that's kind of, just wanted to give you guys an update on that's what I think, unless there's any surprises, that would be, once that position is filled, that would be the new cabinet structure. And as we go into this year, would be the goal. Just wanted you guys to have that access to that in case there were any questions.
Okay, thank you. Last up here, just upcoming stuff we've got on our schedule. Lynn sent out an email today, I believe it was, about the Summer Leadership Institute that ISBA is putting on.
3 out of 4.
Okay, and you've heard back from 3 out of 4?
I've heard back from all 4.
Oh, okay, all right.
3 of 4 will attend,
Okay.
and I'll check with Dr. Cook
Okay.
tomorrow.
Lots of fun.
Okay, so that's July 26th. We do not have a workshop scheduled this month at this point. Okay. And then I think we're working on something for August. September, we've got the mental health workshop. And then, of course, our regular board meetings. And August 7th meeting for the appointment. So lots to do. Okay, well, if there's nothing further, go ahead and adjourn the meeting.